Sorcery, Magic and Alchemy, Book 3. By Sierra Graves. Chapter 1. Brogan. Rori was missing for a week and a half. A whole damned 10 days with no leads to where she was, but a good idea of what was happening to her, thanks to the news Chaz brought back from the void. From my uncle, who had decided to kill himself to end the torture, rather than fighting to live. Grayson, the uncle I grew up hearing stories about, had taken his own life. The strong shaman who showed no fear. Who was the strongest member of our family? How was Rori supposed to hold out if he couldn't? And her dad? He was alive, but it seemed he might not be of sound mind anymore. If Rori did survive long enough for us to find her, would she still be herself? Or a monster we would have to put down like Graham had to be, turned against us by what they were doing to our kind? Corrupting our magic at its simplest form. I continued to tell myself it wasn't possible, but the proof contradicted me. More and more reports were coming in of entire magical towns being attacked, shocked in an attempt to destroy their magic. The government had finally stepped in, made note that they were aware it was happening, but not really done anything to help. At the end of the day, it was left to us to deal with the issue. Bruni tapped my shoulder and I jumped, forgetting she was so close. Her brow furrowed, but I waved her off and focused on our goal. The soldier captured during the attack at the outpost had been quiet about where Rori was taken, but we managed to get a few answers out of him, including the location of a supply depot where they were making all their plans to attack the magical communities. It wasn't their main base of operations, but it was a start. And like Chaz, I needed to destroy something. And soon. He'd been nothing but a growling bear for most of the last week, barely talking or eating. Hardly sleeping. And he still refused to be alone with me. I was upset about Rori being gone, but he was taking it much harder than I expected. My gut nagged at me that something else happened in the void which he had yet to share with me. Sooner or later, it would come out. Got movement, Bruni whispered. 2 guards. No, 3. I peered through the brush at the warehouse across a gravel lot, tucked away a few acres on a chunk of land owned by one T.S. Bogard. They had covered their tracks well, but after going through shell companies and tax records, Moran's tech team was finally able to use those names and track down their properties. We were still missing any official records on who they were before this shit began, but it was a start. Chaz. I perked up when his power kicked in and cursed when his bear form shoved through the underbrush, moving toward the warehouse. Bears were uncommon in these parts, but any idiot with eyes would see the druidic markings in his fur. Apparently not these idiots, though. The 3 guards froze at the sight of the massive brown bear, as if he was a regular bear. They tilted their heads together, lips moving as they figured out what they should do. One of them stepped forward cautiously and clapped his hands loudly. Go on. Get, he yelled and whistled. The 2 guards looked at their companion like he was stupid, walking backward away from the bear who had stopped short, shaking out his furry neck. What the hell was Chaz playing at? The 3 of us were only meant to scope out and report back to, not charge in there. Chaz suddenly stood up on his hind legs and roared in the guard's face. The man paled, fumbling with his rifle, except Chaz was faster. He swiped his paw down on the gun, breaking it in half while magic swirled around him. The 2 guards behind their companion yelled in warning. Bruni and I charged out of the trees, dragging the soldiers away from the warehouse using a furious gust of wind, while Bruni trapped them to the ground with golden bands of light. Chaz picked the first guard up in his jaws, shook him hard and spun around, then tossed him through the doors and into the warehouse. So much for laying low, I yelled at him. What are you thinking, huh? He huffed and snarled at me what I was pretty sure were curses. Then with another angry growl, ran inside as fast as he could. Is he always like this? Bruni asked, leaning on her staff, wincing each time she heard a man yell in pain. Shouldn't we go in there and help? No. I leaned against the outside wall. Our intel from the day before showed maybe 10 guards in there at most. With Chaz in a rage and in bear form, he was quite capable of dealing with those bastards alone. I preferred not to get in the way of his anger. Bruni poked her head around the side and raised her staff, glowing a soft white signifying she was about to heal. I shook my head. He's bleeding. Is he on the verge of dying? Well, no. I raised my brow. Then don't heal him. If he wants to be a dumbass, let him deal with the consequences. Save your strength. She hesitated but lowered her staff, and the light receded. There was a loud crash, and when two men came sprinting out, I punched one in the face and tripped up the second. Lightning struck the ground around their fallen bodies when they tried to get up again. Best you boys just stay down. I smiled at them and leaned against the wall. You got them? I asked Bruni. Yeah, I can handle them. Are you sure you can handle him? She nodded toward the massive bear inside, tearing apart crates and furniture. We'll find out soon enough. I called Blade first, to let him know the warehouse was no longer a problem. When he asked why and I told him, he cursed, then said he'd be there in 5 with a team, then hung. Shoving my cell in my pocket, I let out a deep breath and strolled inside, taking in the sight of the rest of the guards in various unconscious positions. Chaz stood on his hind legs, shaking a duffel bag with his teeth. His body was surrounded by a green and blue swirling mist. You finished, or do you want another 5 minutes? I asked loudly. He spat out the duffel. When the blue mist surrounded him more fully, then it parted, and Chaz was back to himself, wiping his face on his sleeve. What? It was faster than waiting for Blade. We are under strict orders to not engage the enemy. Moran's just scared he'll lose another one of us. But I am not going to stand around wasting time for other soldiers to come to fight our battles when we need to be looking for her. We're running out of time, and each day she's with them is one more day they get to torture her, break her. You don't think I know that? I snapped, losing patience. You think I don't want to find her? You seem content to follow whatever orders Moran hands out at the moment. He crossed his arms, growling at me quietly under his breath. We need to find her. And we will, but you can't rush headlong into the enemy. Why not? Worked, didn't it? This time. What if next time the place is a trap? Or they have more guards than we originally thought? Moran's orders are to keep us out of their hands. I can take care of myself. I threw my hands up, grunting in annoyance. Do you even hear how stupid you sound? I'm not questioning your fighting ability. I'm questioning your strategy. We have one of their soldiers, and we'll get him to talk. When? He threw back furiously. When will he give us the answers we need? You have to have faith, I tried to tell him. He shook his head. We need answers now, and I will do whatever I have to do to get her back. I glared at him across the warehouse. What the hell is that supposed to mean? You're acting like I won't. You're the one who's hesitating to do what's necessary. I want to find her just as bad as you do. What's gotten into you? Chaz rolled his shoulders and his gaze shifted away from me. Nothing. I just want to find Rori and their damned leaders and end this war. No, you're different. Something about you changed in the void. I stalked closer, and he took a step back as if anticipating an attack. Why are you so intent on killing everything in your path to get to her? I don't know what you're talking about, he muttered. She's part of our team. That's it. Bullshit. He took another step back. Just let it go, Brogan. No, because for a week you've been on edge, snapping at everyone and not talking to me at all. Especially not about Rori, I pointed out. What happened between you two? I sensed it the moment I saw them join the fight back at the outpost. Knew there was a change in the connection between the three of us. I had seen the briefest glimpse of confusion and guilt in Rori's eyes, but then she was gone and Chaz had refused to tell me. I told myself I knew already what was going on, but I had to hear it from Chaz. I had to know the truth, so we could both get over it and move on. Chaz, tell me. Outside, 2 trucks from the convoy pulled up. Doors slammed and gravel crunched as our men unloaded, but I kept my gaze focused on Chaz. Waiting. Blade's voice reached my ears, but Bruni answered whatever questions he was asking, actually the demands he was making. "Chaz," I said through gritted teeth, waiting for the anger and hurt to hit me when he said the words. I held my breath as he finally sighed, hanging his head. "We shared a moment," he said so quietly I almost didn't catch the words. "A moment," I repeated. "What the hell does that mean?" "We kissed, all right," he rumbled. "We talked, and then one thing just led to another, and we're both confused, and she's lost, and I'm sorry, all right?" "Sorry you did it, or sorry you lied to me?" I asked quietly. He exhaled heavily. "Lied to you. It wasn't our intention, but then she was taken, and there never seemed to be a good time to explain." My fist collided with his face without even meaning to do it. I brought my other fist up and hit him hard enough to send him into a metal table behind him. Blade yelled my name, but Chaz and I were scuffling. Actually, he wasn't really fighting back, just guarding his face as I tried to hit him again and again. "Enough!" Blade yelled. I was thrown backward. Blade stepped between us. "What the hell has gotten into you two? This is not the time for whatever spat you have with each other." Chaz wiped the blood from his split lip, not saying a damned word. I tugged my shirt and glowered at him, honestly not even sure what had gotten into me in the first place. I was mad they lied to me, yeah, but if I was honest, somewhere deep down I knew it wasn't going to last with Rori and me. We had fun together, but these fights, they'd changed us both, and I saw her more as my teammate. More like my companion than the girl I thought I was falling for. I'd become a new person, just as she had when she began embracing both paths. "You good?" Blade asked sharply. "Brogan." "Chaz." "Yes, sir," I replied stiffly. Chaz nodded. "Good, then can someone please explain to me why you all ignored my order?" I pointed to Chaz. "Ask him." "Chaz, explain why I shouldn't throw your ass in a truck and drag you back to Moran and tell him the shit you just pulled." Blade's voice was strained. We were wasting time. I saw an opening, I took it. "You shifted in bear form and charged in," I corrected. "You didn't even ask Bruni and me, you just waltzed on in here and had at it. I knew you two were there. You would have kept me alive." I shook my head, walking away to let my temper cool as Blade lit into Chaz about not following orders. At least, now I knew why he was more hot-tempered than normal. I thought I had deep feelings for Rori. And I did as a friend, I realized now. But Chaz, he had it bad, and it was killing him slowly, not knowing what was happening to her. He had to think before he acted though, or he was going to get himself killed. I was not going to be the one to tell Rori, if and when we found her, that the guy she might have liked more than me got himself killed in the process of looking for her. "Pack it up," Blade bellowed. "I want prisoners loaded and every scrap out of here in 20. I said nothing else to Chaz as we packed up crates of weapons to be taken back to our labs for examination. Bruni asked me if I was all right, and I managed a nod, but had no words to really tell her exactly what was going on inside my head. It was a jumbled mess, and it was going to stay a jumbled mess until we got back to the outpost and I could lock myself away for a while.
Chapter 2. Chaz. I touched my busted lip gingerly as the door to my room opened. I expected to see Brogan there, ready to chew me out some more, but it was Agnes. She leaned on her staff, watching me plop down at the end of my cot. "What?" I finally grunted when several minutes of silence passed. "Hear you and Brogan are not getting along today." "Nah. Just a spat between friends," I muttered and hoped that would be the end of it. Agnes sighed. "What?" I told him the truth. "I don't care what's going on between you and Brogan," she said firmly. "Then why are you here?" She pushed off the door and walked around my small room. "Because you are part of a team now, and a team must function well together at all times, no matter what drama is going on in your lives. Do you hear me? It's not like I did it on purpose." "And what exactly did you do, Chaz?" I chewed on my cheek and shrugged. "It's nothing, just drama like you said. From the way you've been acting lately, I'm going to assume you and Rori have come to understand how much you truly mean to one another, and you did not tell Brogan. I did tell him. Later, I mumbled. He's my friend. Not the easiest thing to admit to your friend. That is not an excuse. Emotions can have a massive influence on your powers. You know this. It's not like you understand where I'm coming from, I snapped, my temper, constantly so close to breaking all the time now, raged again. You and Moran are together, and it's easy. But Rori, she was with Brogan first, and I feel like the asshole who somehow got in the middle without meaning to. You truly believe, Moran, and I have it easy, she whispered. Chaz, by rule we cannot be together. Every day, we have to hide what we feel for each other. She patted my cheek as she smiled at me sadly. If we were not at war, this would not be such an issue, but you four are still the only elite guard team we have. Whatever emotional turmoil you're going through right now, there is no time to wait for it to pass. You have to face it head on and accept the consequences of your actions. Admitting the truth to Brogan had been hard. How did you tell your friend you kissed the girl he's with, and you're pretty sure she now likes you more than him? He decked me, but he could have struck me with lightning, thrown me through a wall. Instead, he'd punched me a few times. I'll go find Brogan, I told Agnes as I rose to my feet. And I suggest you take time to work with him and Bruni. She is an excellent priest. I trained her myself for a while. She will make an excellent teammate. I'd meant to speak to Bruni more and see how well the three of us could work together until we got Rori back, but I wasn't in the mood. Maybe because I hadn't slept much, if at all. When I wasn't flopping around in bed, I was finding something, anything really, to do to keep me busy and get my mind off how long Rori had been gone and at the mercy of those bastards. I clenched and unclenched my fists as I exited my room to track down Brogan first, and take whatever else he wanted to throw at me. I longed to be outside in the woods, letting my anger out through my bear, but Moran would skin me alive if I did that right now. We were still making repairs to the outpost, and after my disobeying orders once today, I was lucky Moran wasn't the one who came to talk to me. I passed several of our soldiers busy at work repairing the outer walls and fortifying the main entrance. I turned right at the next intersection and heard Blade's voice echoing up from the lower level. Peering over the railing, I spotted him leading the guards from the warehouse to the cells where the other prisoner was being held. The one who'd given us only a tiny bit of information so far. I'd pleaded with Moran to let me go down there and talk with him, but he seemed to believe I would kill the man before I even asked him any questions. Sadly, he was probably right. I would have beaten the man within an inch of his life until he told me what I needed to hear. We would get Rori back. I never doubted Brogan wanted to rescue her as much as I did, but it was like an ache in my chest I wasn't able to get rid of ever since I learned she was taken. All I wanted was to see her again, alive and well, and be able to tell myself I did not fail her. Brogan was alone in the temple with the door open. I was going to walk away and leave him to his meditating, but his eyes opened. You coming in or what? I ground my teeth, stepped inside, wishing I could close the door. How's your face? He asked. Hurts, but I deserved it. Listen, Brogan, I started to say. He held up his hand to stop me. No, let me get this out first, he said in a rush. I care for Rori a lot, but, if I'm honest with myself and with you, the relationship we started to have was over the night the cleansers attacked 4 Point. All of us have turned into different people, and I don't think we would have lasted much longer, not like I think you two can. I looked at him, sure my jaw had dropped at some point. This was not what I expected to hear. I waited for him to laugh and say he was kidding, and he was pissed at me after all, waited for him to throw another punch, but he got up instead and held his hand out to me. Seriously, Chaz, I had a feeling it wouldn't work out. Not like we'd been dating for years or anything, he reminded me. Not like we ever really had much of a chance, but if you two somehow managed to find that connection in the midst of this shit, then I think it's right. I took his hand, shaking it as I shook my head. You sure you don't want to deck me again? No. I wasn't even that upset about what you two did. But we can't lie to each other, he said, gripping my hand tighter. That will get us all killed. Not the easiest thing to tell your friend. No, but what would have happened if it came out during a more serious fight? Trust me, already got the brief lecture from Agnes about emotions affecting our powers and so on. I took my hand back and slowly walked the perimeter of the room. It's all confusing being so close. And now we've got another person we're dragging into this mess. Good thing we can't see what's in each other's heads, right? I laughed with him, and it felt good to have this moment, for about 5 seconds. Then I was right back to worrying what Rori was going through. Brogan's dark look said his mind went to the same, and he nodded toward the door. We should find Bruni, see if we can't all get a better handle on fighting together. Or we could track down Blade and see if those guards spilled anything else yet. They just got here, give the man some time. Bruni first. You two haven't even had a conversation yet. And it wasn't for lack of trying on her part. I'd been too wrapped in worrying about tracking down Rori to stop for 5 seconds to realize we had found our fourth. And she was incredible so far. I followed Brogan out of the temple, and for the first time in a week, we were able to have a conversation. Despite the seriousness of our current predicament, we found a few things to laugh about, mostly my idiocy of rushing in to confront those guards. By the time we tracked down Bruni, who was with one of her fighting buddies, Jackson, we were guffawing so hard she eyed us like we had a few screws loose. Which, to be fair at this point, we probably did. All right, Bruni, what do you say the three of us get some good old-fashioned sparring in? At the same time, visiting, so you two can get to know one another? Brogan suggested. Sounds like a good plan to me. She smiled sadly as she shook my hand. Look, I'm sorry about Rori getting taken, but I'll be here to help you guys get her back. Looking forward to meeting her, really. A necromancer. Who would have thought? Yeah, not us, I said with a bitter laugh. And sorry for not being very hospitable. Actually, he's been nicer to you than he was to me and Rori the first time, Brogan chimed in. I glowered at him. Bruni laughed. Well, then I'll take that as a compliment. You should, I said. Brogan here just doesn't know when to quit while he's ahead. It's a gift, Brogan said with a broad grin. He led the way out of the mess hall, and deeper into the outpost, to the training room. Agnes said she trained you, I said to Bruni as we walked. Trained you too from what I hear, she replied. She's definitely a hard teacher, but I learned a few tricks from her. I have no worries after what I've seen so far. Good. She hesitated. And as Brogan moved on ahead of us, she slowed down. I frowned as I matched her slower pace until he was way ahead of us. This is kind of embarrassing, but I just want to know for my benefit, she whispered. Know what? I asked, wondering what was that bad she wanted to ask. When I tapped into the connection with you and Brogan and Rori during that first fight, everyone's emotions were all over the place, she said. I nodded, remembering exactly how I'd felt the first time I'd joined with Rori and Brogan. But? I don't know. I can't decide if it's just the connection or me, but never mind. Bruni, wait. I caught her arm when she made to walk away. Just ask. We're a team now, and whether you like it or not, we're going to be close. We can't afford to hide anything from each other. Trust me. She blew out a breath, and for the first time since meeting her, she appeared nervous. I have a feeling I know what your guys' fight today at the warehouse was about, but can you clarify for me what's going on? I just want to know and make sure I'm not going to say anything out of turn, step on any toes, you know. Help a girl out here. I glanced ahead of us, but Brogan was out of sight. Before this war broke out, back when the fall semester started for new recruits, Rori and Brogan began dating, I explained, not exactly comfortable talking about it, but she had a point. She had a right to know. They were together but now they're not anymore, I finished lamely. And you're the reason for that? She cringed like she would rather be asking me anything but that. And Rori and Brogan, I said with a light laugh. Honestly, the three of us have changed so much since that first major battle. The one at the outpost, she said as we started walking again, that was my first. What? No way, I argued, but she was nodding. You fight like it's second nature. Agnes is not the only teacher I've had. I was transferred to another 4-point facility to try and see if I was compatible with anyone there. I remember you vaguely, but you tend to keep to yourself, or well, you used to. I studied her face, then remembered seeing her a few times with Agnes in the workshop. I thought you looked familiar. Yeah, I was a loner before Rori and Brogan. Nice to see someone was able to bring you around and make you sociable. I laughed with her. Yeah, guess running around in the woods as a bear most of the time wasn't really a life. You two coming or what? Brogan called back, finally having stopped for us to catch up. Yeah, we're coming. Keep your panties on, I teased, and Bruni laughed even harder as Brogan rolled his eyes. What? You're not the only one who can crack jokes around here. Maybe, maybe not, but he said as he leaned in and whispered, Who said I was wearing panties? Oh man. Come on. I gave him a shove as he cackled in glee. Bruni sighed, no doubt wondering what she had just gotten herself into. I let them go on ahead of me, taking a second to pause and think of Rori. My smile fell, and I sent her whatever strength I could, willing her to hold on. I swiped my forearm across my forehead, wiping up the sweat. You were definitely trained by Agnes, what with that damn staff of yours, I muttered, as Bruni and Brogan sat on either side of me against the back wall. Damn. I don't know how many of those moves she's used against me. Then you should have seen them coming, given me some warning, Brogan complained. How would you learn if I warned you? I pushed to my feet and stretched. I'm going to hit the showers. Blade and Moran walked into the room, eyeing the three of us. Or not. Quick mind change, courtesy of those two. They eyed the three of us. What? Did the guards say something? I asked eagerly, heart leaping at the chance to finally go for Rori. No, Moran said, which is why I am going to ask you to come with me. All of you. He turned on his heel and walked away. When none of us moved, he whipped back around. Right now. Blade gave nothing away but motioned for us to get a move on. The three of us fell in line behind Moran, Blade bringing up the rear. We marched through the outpost until we were down in the holding cells. The guards and the soldier from the attack were crammed into one room, glaring at us through the glass. I am asking you to give them some motivation to speak, Moran told me. You're going to let me question them? 1 or 2 questions, yes. But Chaz, if for any second you believe you will not be able to control yourself, you tell me now. I headed toward the glass. I can control myself. Moran breathed out heavily but nodded to Blade. One guard and the soldier. Blade seemed ready to argue, but gave the order for one of ours to grab the 2 prisoners from the room. They were dragged out and taken down the hall to a smaller room with 3 chairs and nothing else. Do not harm them, Moran warned me. But our tactics do not seem to work. You want me to scare the shit out of them? Essentially, yes. If you want to find Rori before it's too late, we need them to talk. And we need them alive. Got it? Do not kill either one of them, Chaz. I'm trusting you here. The notion of tearing them limb from limb did sound appealing, but he was right. If I was ever to control my temper, it had to be now. I said nothing else, just walked to the room past Blade, then shut the door behind me. I sat down, but the 2 men remained standing, both across from me. The soldier glared. The guard shook, his eyes darting wildly around the room. We need you to tell us where Simon and Tabitha are keeping several prisoners, I said. The guard looked to the soldier as he opened his mouth, but the other man hissed at him to stay quiet. We are not telling you anything. It would be better if you did, I suggested. I said nothing to your leader. What makes you think I'll tell you anything, boy? The soldier with the busket snapped. I hope they've killed your friends already, just like we'll do to the rest of you. Well past time to get rid of magic. It has no place in this world. I rolled my shoulders as blue and green magic swirled around my hands, moss spread out from beneath my chair. Boy, huh? Busket's eyes narrowed. Man, I told you, the guard with blonde hair whispered. Shut up, But he's not like the others. Just tell him. Blondie had seen me in bear form, but I didn't recognize the other soldier. In the chaos, I doubted he saw me. I pulled on more magic, until it flowed out from me in steady pulses. Answer my question, I said again, my voice tinged with power. Blondie looked more than ready to talk, but Busket kept shaking his head. I shot a glance to Moran on the other side of the glass, and subtly nodded my head, trying to let him know no matter what he saw next, I was very much in control. Which was a real pity. Spilling a good amount of blood would be what they deserved. I jumped to my feet with a yell that turned into an ear-splitting roar, shaking the panes of glass. Both men cowered when my bear form emerged and towered over them, filling the cramped space. I roared again, baring fangs. I raised my paw, ready to swipe Busket and easily slice open his face. He pressed himself back into the wall as my paw came crashing down. Wait, Blondie yelled. Utah. All right. It's in Utah. Busket shot him a glare and looked ready to hit his own man, but I smacked him across the face with my paw, and he flew into the glass, breaking his nose with a grunt as he slid to the floor in a heap. I shifted back to find Moran giving me a look, but I shrugged, then turned back to Blondie. I shifted into my bear. I want an exact location, or you'll wind up with worse than a broken nose, got it? Get me a map, he said, nodding his head. Get me a map, and I'll show you where they are. I glared at him, but he seemed to be telling the truth. Wait here. I stepped over Busket's feet and exited the room. He needs a map. Moran yelled for one to be brought, then clapped me on the shoulder. Thought I said not to hurt them. To be fair, he was about to hurt Blondie there. Moran's pursed lips said that was not a good enough reason, but ordered Busket to be cleaned up, then thrown back in with the others. The second we have this location, we're moving out. Brogan, Chaz, Bruni, get ready to fight. If we're going after our people, we are not going in quietly. There was nothing left to say. The three of us hurried through the outpost back to our rooms to get ready. We'd find this place and rescue Rori and whoever else they had captive there. Her dad, other elite guard members. We'd get them all out, and with any luck kill Simon and Tabitha in the process, and end this war before we lost any more of our own.
Chapter 3. Rori. A door slammed open, and I flinched, squinting against the sudden flash of lights flickering around me. I grunted at the soreness I knew was going to be a constant part of my life now. My arms, my legs, everything screamed in agony from being in the same damn position for what, a week? More? My wrists were raw as were my ankles, and all I wanted to do was lay down on the floor and cry. I had yet to do that though, and I was damned proud of myself for it. It was coming. I couldn't hold out forever. Rori. Tabitha approached my cage with that damned leer on her face. Bitch, I replied, forcing my lips into a sneer with all the strength I had left. What's on the torture roster for today? If only Chaz could hear me now. Pretty sure he'd be smirking at the mouth on me. Brogan, he'd be begging me to keep my mouth shut. My heart ached thinking of how I left both of them. I glanced past Tabitha toward the door, but no one came bursting in to save me. Didn't stop me from dreaming of it anyway. Tabitha followed my gaze. She sneered as she walked around my cage slowly, holding that damned remote in her hand. No one's coming to save you, Rori. Says you. Yes, says me. Because no one knows where you are. But you know where the other members of your team are. I scoffed. Seriously? You attacked the outpost. They've probably moved by now. Her grin made my skin crawl, and I tugged absently at my wrists, waiting for them to eventually break free. Another dream that had yet to happen. Our sources say they have not, so you are in luck. She stopped suddenly, pressing herself closer to the cage. If you would just cooperate, you would be getting out of here sooner rather than later. You know where they are. I was confused. What do you want from me? It's clear you are quite an interesting hybrid. Necromancer and Frost Mage. So what? I barely know what I'm doing. For the moment, but that is about to change. All of this was to see how much you can take, to see if what runs in another's blood runs in yours. I'm happy to report it does. She pressed her finger on the remote, and I gritted my teeth, waiting for the electrical shocks to course through my body and leave me screaming until I was hoarse. Instead, the bindings around my wrists popped free, and I toppled over, smacking into the hard floor beneath me with a curse. My ankles were freed next. Confused, I watched Tabitha walk to the front of my cage and unlock the door. She held it open and motioned for me to get out. I feared I was too weak to rise. Too weak to do anything. I pushed up on my forearms, gasping at muscles that were finally able to relax. Well, come on. I don't have all day. Tabitha sighed. I can't, you dumbass, I snapped. You will either walk out of this cage right now, or I will send a guard in to drag you out by the hair. She shrugged one shoulder as two men in black uniforms stepped forward, scowls on their faces. Or maybe I was wrong about you, and you need more time in the cage. Your choice. Digging deep and thinking of the kiss I'd shared with Chaz, the fire I'd felt warm my usually frozen veins, I crawled forward through the agony until I reached the bars. With cursing that turned into a shriek, I hauled myself upright and limped out of the cage, one step at a time. If I hadn't been doing all I could just to keep myself standing, I would have smacked that smirk right off her face. I considered snapping my fingers and summoning my staff or Merlin now that I was away from the electrical shocks, but the slight nod of her head toward the guards let me know that any move I made I would regret. Plus, if I used any power it'd probably knock me out, and the last thing I wanted was to wake up in that damn cage again. Not to mention, I doubted I was strong enough to summon anything at all. The shocks she'd been torturing me with continually had cut me off from my power. Even now, I hardly felt it inside me. Good. Follow me. Tabitha made for the door. And keep up or you'll be dragged. The floor looked like a great place to lie down, but instead I put one foot in front of the other, following Tabitha's white lab coat and tightly pulled bun. Part of me screamed to pay attention to details, to search for a way out. But where was I going to go? Not like I'd get far in this shape. I staggered forward, cursing as I was just about to fall when two strong arms caught me and put me back on my feet. Careful, the guard whispered, sounding a lot nicer than he looked. Do what she says, and you'll get through this alive. Why do you care? I snapped, yanking my arm free and glaring at him. Until I caught the tattoo on the back of his hand. Shaman, but what the hell are you doing working for her? I hissed. Most of her guards are magic users. It's how they keep them in check. But you could bust out. All of you could. He tilted his head subtly. I caught a flash of silver embedded in his neck. Not so easy. He grimaced. Keep up, Rori, Tabitha snapped. Clamming up, the guard gave me a helpful nudge forward. I picked up the pace the best I could. Each time I stumbled, the shaman was there to set me right again. I chanced a glance at the other guard's hand and spotted the marking of a druid. He nodded to me, but said nothing at all. I thought simply being in the cage had been hell. But this, knowing who Tabitha was using to keep our own people locked up, that made me sick to my stomach. We walked down halls and more halls, but thankfully no stairs. I would have wound up on my face if we had. When Tabitha stopped outside a white room with a change of clothes on a cot, and what appeared to be a bathroom through another door, I frowned. What's this? Get cleaned up. Sleep. Food will be brought for you when you wake. Why would I trust eating anything you serve me? I asked with a frown. You will need your strength for what comes next. She smiled like she was offering me the best gift in the world. You will go in that room, or you will go back to the cage. I quickly stepped into the room, hating her grin. Happy? Soon when we end this war one will be. She reached in and pulled the door shut. I tried the knob right away, but it was locked. Figures, I muttered, turning around slowly. The bed called to me, but a shower and a chance to clean my wounds sounded better. I turned the water on hot, stripped out of my dirty clothes and stepped under the spray. At some point during my shower I lost my will of steel, and broke down, sinking to the floor of the shower as sobs left me shaking and hugging my knees to my chest. I stayed in there until the water started to grow cold, and I washed myself off, being careful around my wrists and ankles. I stepped out and towel dried, staring at the stranger in the mirror. The bags under my eyes were beyond terrible. My face was gaunt and sickly looking. My hair somehow looked whiter. The last week replayed itself over and over in my head. Being given what Tabitha called supplements instead of actual food. Water twice a day, bathroom break once a day, though the cuffs never left my wrists or ankles. Never a chance to sit down or lay down. Never left alone, always a guard watching me in the cage. And the torture. I shuddered as my hands gripped the sink, trying and failing not to remember the crackling as it rushed through me. I thought those grenades had been bad, but this had been so much worse. Eventually, I slipped into the clean black pants and t-shirt, then fell into bed. The second my head hit the pillow, I slipped into oblivion and slept. As promised, food was delivered, but I could hardly eat anything, too nervous and ticked off to stomach much. I hadn't seen Tabitha since she brought me to this nicer version of a cage. The guards would not tell me anything, no matter how many times I asked. I assumed there were others close by, who were preventing them from giving me any information. When I finished eating, I paced around the room, snapping my fingers every so often, waiting for a spark of magic to come back. Ice covered my fingertips by the time my door was being unlocked again, but that was all I managed. No staff. No Merlin. Nothing but cold fingertips. "This way," the guard said as he opened the door and stepped aside. "Where are we going?" I asked, not making a move. It was the same guard from before, the shaman. He frowned at me, whispering, "It's better if you don't fight. And trust me, you might want to see what Tabitha has to show you this time." How the hell did I know if I could trust him or not? I hesitated until another guard appeared in the doorway. This one was not a magic user, and glared at me, a taser in his right hand. That got me moving, if only to avoid being jabbed with any more electricity of any kind. I left my cell behind, hoping it wasn't the last time I'd get to sleep in a bed in this place. I was marched between 6 guards, 3 in front and 3 behind. As if I had any idea how to escape, let alone the will to try, at that moment. Did I want to be here a minute longer than necessary? Hell no, but as long as I would gather as much intel as I could for when I did finally escape. At least that's what I told myself. Hope. I had to hold on to hope. We walked for what seemed like an hour. Suddenly the guard stepped aside, and I was shoved through a set of glass doors and into another sterile white room. This one was larger than the one where my cage had resided, but above it, the entire upper level was a viewing gallery. Tabitha and the man I assumed was Simon stood in the center. Their smiles were dark. My steps slowed to a crawl, but the guard with the taser gave me a small taste in the middle of my back, and I cursed, hurrying to reach the 2 psychopaths. "Thank you, Victor," Tabitha said. "Rori, I trust your new accommodations are to your liking?" "Better than being in a damned cage with bars, I guess," I muttered. Tabitha's smile faltered slightly, but the man beside her smirked. "She does have a fiery attitude. Like someone else we know." "That she does, but I trust before long it will not be a problem." "What am I doing here?" I interrupted their conversation. "I won't do anything for you, not against my friends or the magic communities. I think we may just have something to change your mind." Tabitha snapped her fingers. A door that had blended in with the white walls parted. I took a scared step back, unsure of what to expect. Until a man stepped out, garbed in black, sporting a long white braid and a scowl. I froze, then managed to get my mouth to work. "Dad?" He walked toward us, no recognition on his face, then stopped beside Tabitha and Simon, a dead look in his pale blue eyes, hands clasped behind his back. That man might have looked like Trevor Griffith, until Grayson's words came back to me. My dad had not been in his right mind the last time he saw him. That was 3 years ago. The chances of the man I knew my father to be existing in this body were slim. "Trevor, we have someone we would like you to train," Simon told him. Rori. Dad's eyes flickered to me, and his lip lifted in disgust. She's small? I bristled at that, wanting to yell at him that I was his damned daughter, but Tabitha was speaking before I could. She is, but she has fight in her, and she is exactly like you. Necromancer and Frost Mage run through her veins. We want you to turn her into a soldier, ready to fight. Ready to do whatever necessary to win this war. Understand? What the hell are you doing? Dad's eyes narrowed at my outburst. I glared right back. You seriously have no idea who I am? None at all. He doesn't, and he won't remember you no matter what you say to him, Simon warned. Best to accept it and move on. This isn't happening, I muttered and walked right up to Dad, grabbing his shoulders even as his eyes widened. You know me. You have to. Rori, your daughter. And what about Jody, the wife you left behind? You have to remember something. We're your family. Come on, Dad, snap out of it. He stiffened under my grip, but there wasn't the slightest hint of recognition in his eyes. My heart broke as he grabbed my arms and set me back on my feet roughly. Enough, girl. I am no one's father. I whirled around with a yell, ready to deck Simon or Tabitha, whichever one I could reach first, but the guard with the taser was there and he jabbed me in the side. I yelped at the shock and fell to my knees, panting. What is this, huh? Why are you using us? Oh, you want me to share our plan with you? Tabitha knelt before me. I'm afraid you will just have to wait and see for yourself when the show starts. Don't worry, you'll have a seat front and center. Necromancy really is the most dangerous path of magic, isn't it? And to have two of you together fighting side by side, this war will finally have the ending I've dreamt of for years. I spat in her face and she backhanded me. You will do as you're told, one way or another. How much pain you endure is up to you. With a yell, I threw myself at her. We rolled across the floor. I nailed her in the face at least twice, then an icy burst of air grabbed hold of me and threw me into the wall. I smacked my head hard enough to make my vision blur. Dad was moving toward me, ice covering his hands. A dark look was in his now violet eyes as he approached. Take her back to her room. Simon snapped. Clearly she is not ready to train today. The guard hauled me to my feet. The hit to my head had been too much, and I went limp. The last thing I saw before my eyes closed was Tabitha wiping blood from her face and Dad giving me the strangest look. But I knew somewhere in those violet depths I saw a hint of confusion. That I could work with. Then darkness.
Chapter 4. Chaz. Cold air brushed across my skin, but thanks to the bear in me, I was perfectly fine. Brogan and Bruni were shaking, moving closer to each other to try and keep warm as the sun slowly rose above the horizon, not lending any warmth to the day. Up ahead along a wide winding gravel drive was what appeared to be an old mansion, set back in the rocky landscape. It was at least 4 stories tall, guarded by a 15-foot wall and 2 watchtowers. A gate blocked any entrance, but I wasn't worried about getting inside, not if Rori was in there. You think this is going to work? Bruni asked. It better, I growled, wanting to shift already. Moran wanted me to wait. So I would wait, at least for now. Blade and a few others were nearby. Moran said he had a way to get inside, but neglected to share it. Where are you? I whispered, searching the rocks and trees for any sign of Moran. Is that him? Brogan nodded toward the road. Seriously? He's just going to drive up to the gate? But as a truck rolled past, we saw there was no driver, and it was being pushed by a force of wind. Moran and 2 other shamans were not far from the gate, staying out of sight as they maneuvered the truck up the drive to the gate. When it hit the metal, they dove to the side. Hey! What the hell are you doing, man? The guard in the watchtower yelled and motioned for another guard to check it out. You can't park here and you just hit my gate. There was no reply since there was no one actually inside the truck. Are we expecting another shipment? The guard at the gate yelled up to the one in the watchtower. Let me call it in. You go check it out. The gate slid open soundlessly. I crouched down, waiting for the signal to attack, but it never came. The guard walked out, already yelling at the man he thought was driving until he peered inside the cab, then paused. "Hey Rob." "What?" the guard in the tower yelled back, the crackling of his radio as loud as his shouting. "There's no driver." "What do you mean there's no driver? What the hell is this?" The guard at the door opened it, aiming his gun in the cab, then shrugged. "No driver. Check the back." He continued toward the back, flipped open the canvas, and poked his head back around. "Looks like supplies from the warehouse." "Damn it. They're supposed to tell us when they're coming." "But Rob, there's no freaking driver," the guard yelled again. Just when I was ready to find a way to get to Moran and ask him what the hell we were waiting for, a gust of tornadic wind gave the truck a helpful shove into the gate. The guard shouted. The wind picked him up and tossed him about, then slammed him into the courtyard beyond the wall. Rob was yelling orders, and more guards poured out of two towers. Suddenly, the truck ignited in a burst of electric energy, shocking them all in. Their bodies jerked and danced as ours had after they'd done the same to us. When the last man fell to the ground twitching, Moran stepped onto the road, glanced back at his hidden forces, and nodded. That was the sign we needed. Our small army stepped onto the road, following Moran and Agnes to the gate. With a swipe of his hand, Moran kicked up a wind to move the truck out of our way, dumping it to the side. The guards grunted and cursed as we walked past them, but they wouldn't be able to move for a long while. Blade ordered those in the back to begin binding their hands. Brogan, Bruni and I walked as a single unit toward the main entrance. Moran sent soldiers to surround the place. We weren't sneaking in. Oh no. Not at all. We were busting down the damned front door. I shifted, and the porch groaned beneath my weight. Brogan's hands crackled with lightning as he drew on my connection to nature. Bruni bolstered her light magic with our powers. Her staff glimmered with power. Who wants to do the honors? Brogan motioned to me, and I rose up on my hind legs, my head brushing the ceiling of the porch. From inside came the sound of panicked yells, and I huffed. Just wait till they saw what was about to come busting in. I threw myself into the doors. They buckled and split instantly. More screams sounded as I walked right on in, expecting to be met with a hail of gunfire. No such thing though. People were rushing around looking scared. Until a guard appeared. I slammed into him, sending him down the hall and his gun flying the opposite direction. Brogan and Bruni charged in after me. An elevator dinged at the end of the long stretch of the hall. A busload of guards came around the corner. I ducked as lightning streaked through the air, striking the front line. Bullets came flying toward us, but Bruni knocked them away with a swipe of her staff, golden light bursting through the hall. I shifted back and pressed my hands to the wall. Tangled moss and vines spread, shooting out to snatch enemy soldiers. Moran shouted orders at his team on the far end of the house. A few minutes later, Blade joined in, his men attacking from the rear. I searched for another way down other than the elevator. Anxiety filled me with the need to get to Rori. A bullet grazed my side. Damn it. I roared, and I aimed the vines at those men and tangled them up. I yanked my hands back, and the vines dragged them out, flattening them to the ceiling. The house was in chaos, but from the looks of it, Moran brought more than enough people to take it over. I started for the elevator. Bruni stopped me. She pressed her hand to my wounded side, and a warmth spread over my body. There, that'll at least stop the bleeding, she said after she sealed the wound. Thanks. It's my job. She nodded toward the elevator. You want to check it out? Where would you hide your lab and prisoners in a place like this? Brogan hustled past both of us. Then what are we waiting for? We marched into the elevator, but paused. There, crouched in the corner hiding, was another guard. He was our age, maybe a few years young. He didn't even have his gun anymore. Wild Eyes looked at us each in turn, yelped and scrambled to get away. There's probably more guards, Bruni warned. Counting on it. Brogan pressed the button for the basement, and the doors slid closed. Cheery music filled the space as the three of us glared at the speaker overhead. Really? I grunted. Just get ready. Brogan spread his hands wide. Lightning crackled, pulling on our combined energy. It came naturally now with us. If there had been any lingering doubts about her as our fourth, they were quickly put to rest. The elevator dinged, and as the doors parted, a man shouted, and gunfire exploded. The three of us were faster. Bruni's light deflected the hits. A tidal wave of vines, moss, and lightning rose up before the elevator, blocking the rest of the bullets, and crashed toward the guards. Brogan was the driving force behind it. All I did was guide it, sticking to the floor, then striking down each side corridor until there were no more screams from the enemy. Brogan's lightning receded. He was shaking from the exertion. "Take care of him," I told Bruni after we stepped off the elevator. "I'm going to check it out." "Watch your back." Brogan tossed me the small bag slung over his back. "Just in case." There were a few more of those electrical grenades in the bag. I slung it across my body, then set off. Magic swirled around my fingertips at the ready. I turned a corner down the second corridor. I froze. "Shit," I whispered. "Brogan? Bruni?" This had to be a nightmare of some kind. I was going to wake up back at the outpost with Rori and Brogan and Bruni. Because never in my mind did I imagine this level of cruelty could exist. The walls were lined with cages, and inside every single one was a magic user. Their hands and feet were bound, strapped into cuffs that appeared to have wires running through them. Most were unconscious, but I had their unfocused gazes set on me. "We're going to get you out of here," I said. "All of you just hold on." You're real," a man whispered, face haggard and eyes filled with disbelief. "I'm real, and I'm not the only one here." "Oh my God," Bruni gasped as she and Brogan caught up to me. Tears shimmered in her eyes, then with an angry yell, she slammed her staff into the ground, and a bright flash of white light smashed into the locks on the cage doors. They all swung open as the electrical system shorted out. She turned to me. "I'm going to find Moran." Brogan and I went to work on the prisoners, starting at one end, and worked our way down. A few fought against us, screaming and yelling that we were there to kill them, but we managed to calm them down and release them. We helped them to the elevators so that when Bruni had more priests, they could get to healing them. I turned to one. The one who'd asked me if I was real. "How long were you down here?" "Too long," was all he said as he held the hand of the woman beside him, tears streaming down her cheeks as she fell into his side. "Too damned long." Insides knotted with fury and anguish, I hurried down the next corridor, but the cages there were empty. We tore apart that basement, finding files and research notes but nothing else. At the end of the last corridor was another cage. In it was a single person. A shadow kept me from seeing a face, and my heart leapt, believing it had to be Rori. It had to be her. I raced down the hall, Brogan right behind me. He shocked the cage, and it shorted out, popping the lock. Hesitating for a second, I caught my breath, then walked inside. "Rori," I whispered. The second I saw the dark red hair, I knew it wasn't her. "Can you hear me?" I asked the girl who was about our age, head hanging low. Brogan and I worked at the bonds holding her when she raised her head. She blinked, then kicked and screamed, flailing violently until we both had to restrain her before she hurt herself. "We're rescuing you. Calm down, all right?" "No, you're not. It's lies, all lies," she ranted. "Get off me, get off." I shot a look at Brogan over her head, both of us thinking the exact same thing. Whatever they'd done to this girl was probably being done to Rori, and we still had no idea where she was. "We are not with the cleansers," I said firmly. "We're magic users, just like you." "So were they," she screeched, and I froze. "Wait, what?" She was fighting us too much, and I had no choice but to knock her out. Brogan frowned at me for that. I shrugged. We didn't have time to keep standing in front of this cage. She was in desperate need of a healing touch. I picked her up and carefully maneuvered her out of the cage to where the others were being tended to, by Bruni, Agnes, and some other priests. Is this all of them? Moran grunted. Yeah, but Rory's not here, I muttered. Trevor Griffith isn't either. And from the look of it, this is not their main headquarters. He shook his head disgusted, staring over the prisoners. How many more properties did they have their name on? A dozen, maybe more. You don't think it'll be that easy to find their main location? I don't. Sadly, they're too smart for that. The red-haired girl said something about magic users, I told him quietly. You don't think the Bogards are, do you? If they were, they never registered with anyone. He eyed the girl. When she wakes, ask her more, see what she'll tell you. He squeezed my shoulder. We'll find Rori. Keep holding on to hope. She's strong. She'll make it. We loaded the people in the elevator, a few at a time, and then out to the waiting trucks. Agnes called ahead to ensure the infirmary was well prepared for an influx of so many. There was a handful of our own hurt, one dead. We captured many. Guards and people in white coats. I glared fiercely at each and every one as they were loaded into an armored truck to be processed and questioned, then handed over to the government. They'd all been labeled as terrorists and would be treated as such. As we climbed into our truck for the long drive back to the outpost, Moran set up a shield around the property to ensure no one could get back inside unless they had heavy-duty firepower. I looked in the side mirror, watching the place get smaller, wishing Rori had been inside. Why couldn't life ever be easy?
Chapter 5. Brogan. After returning to the outpost, Chaz and I helped unload the prisoners to be processed, as Bruni assisted Agnes with the wounded. I wouldn't lie and say a few of the prisoners weren't roughed up between the trucks and their holding cells. Chaz decked at least one guard and shoved another so hard he was thrown into the back wall, breaking his nose. Blade's face had darkened, but he said nothing and locked the man away, not caring his face was covered in blood. Tensions in the outpost were higher than ever, and my anger was beyond where I ever thought it could be. Rori had not been there, and it was eating away at Chaz and me. He muttered something about getting fresh air, and I took the few minutes to disappear into my room, so I could get a handle on my raw emotions. I cleaned myself up from the fighting, washed my face, and pressed a towel to it. Taking the building had been easier than I expected, but the place had been lightly guarded. When we did find Rori, how much harder would it be to take that place down? The second we saw that last cage, I'd been thinking the same as Chaz, certain that Rori had to be in there. And when it hadn't been her, I feared we'd never find her. At least, not the Rori we knew. That red-headed girl, we had no way of knowing how long she'd been there yet, but she'd been broken down. And what she'd said about other magic users, we had to understand what she meant by that. My hands shook, and I held them in front of my face. Seeing so many people trapped like animals, knowing they'd been tortured. I wanted to go down to the cells and punch them all, shock a few of them. See how they liked it. I used to be the happy guy of the group, but now all I thought of was violence. Of hurting, killing. Brogan. You in there? Bruni knocked lightly on my door. Yeah, just give me a minute, I replied, splashing more water on my face, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging in my eyes as I stared at my reflection. As much as I'd told Rori she'd changed since the war started, I had just as much. Parts of me were slipping away every time we were confronted the bastards. How much longer until there was nothing of the old me left? Until I was a heartless soldier out for revenge. If I couldn't find an outlet for this anger, I'd end up taking it out on someone else by accident. Chaz or Bruni. Anyone else besides me. Even as I stood there, lightning crackled at my fingertips, striking against the sink and mirror. Brogan. Bruni called out. You all right? I hung my head, giving it a shake. I was clearly not all right, not even close. I forced myself to the door, and as soon as Bruni saw me, she grabbed my hand and ordered me to follow her. I opened my mouth to ask what we were doing, but the words were lodged behind a roar of rage that clawed to get free. For the first time, I was jealous of Chaz's ability to shift into a bear. To have a way to let his rage out in the woods where no one could see his breakdown, to crash through the wilderness and be a wild beast if only for a few minutes. Bruni guided us outside to the courtyard, then finally came to a stop. What are we doing out here? We are releasing pent-up anger before either one of us self-combusts. You look fine to me, I pointed out. She laughed bitterly, and the golden glow to her eyes darkened. I didn't even think. I'm sorry. For what? Did you attack our people? Throw them in cages and torture them, she snapped, then took a deep breath and let it out. Sorry, but no, I'm not all right. I doubt anyone in there is, but the three of us can't be unstable if another attack comes. You know it as much as I do. Chaz too. Which is why he's out there running around somewhere, probably terrorizing all the poor rabbits in the area. Not sure what you want me to do here. Let it out, all your anger. Channel it into a storm and unleash it. Let it go. Not sure that's such a good idea. Brogan, you have a storm raging in your eyes, and if you don't let it out, what's going to happen the next time we're attacked? You'll lose control. You'll take out everyone around you, including us. You have to let it go now, before you hurt someone which we both know you'd regret for the rest of your life. And you? What are you doing to do? She shrugged. Figured I'd let out a good scream or two with you. I looked at the sky, clear and blue with a few white fluffy clouds. The air was cold, but there was no sign of snow in the forecast for a while yet. I just stood there until Bruni told me to close my eyes and breathe in deeply through my nose, then let it out my mouth. Was I angry? Sure, I'd been angry since 4 Point was attacked. Actually, before then. I was angry when we learned we were the only elite guard team to be formed in years because of those bastards. That now, we were one of the only hopes for bringing them down. Lightning crackled along my fingertips as I tilted my head back and opened my eyes. More clouds rolled in, slowly blocking out the sun. More anger flowed through me as I recalled the fight that nearly ended with all of us being captured and thrown in cages. Just like the ones we saw this morning. The lightning flowed over my body in an endless wave as my hands curled into fists. So much pain and suffering, so much death because of those people. Rori was lost to us and still going through hell, with no way of our knowing if we'd get to her in time. Had she given up hope yet? Was she even herself anymore? A whirlwind of emotions burst from me, forming a tornado that whipped my hair back from my face. I expected Bruni to run for cover, but instead, she reached out and grabbed hold of my hand. Let it out, she yelled over the howling winds. Let your anger go. I lowered my head as I remembered feeling what it was like to almost die, knowing what Rori sacrificed to bring me back, what it had done to her. Pushing her over a ledge she hadn't been ready for. How Chaz's fate was tied to what would be the outcome of our final battle against the cleansers. Unable to hold back any longer, I threw my head back and bellowed my rage as clouds covered the blue sky and the storm within me took to the heavens. I sucked in a deep breath and yelled again as lightning struck the ground around us. Bruni squeezed my hand, and soon her own yells of fury and pain joined mine, the golden light from her body lighting up the storm's intense darkness that surrounded us. All the pent-up agony and anger flowed out of me and into that storm, until finally the wind died down and the clouds rolled toward the east, thunder rumbling every now and again until it was silent once more. Blue sky appeared beneath the black clouds. Bruni was holding my hand still, and when I turned to her, she was grinning. Feel better? She asked. Yeah, I do. I didn't realize that was even in me. I felt it the first time I met you, she admitted, felt it getting worse each time something happened. Part of my job, you know, taking care of the team. She frowned, closing her eyes for a second but gave her head a shake. I wish I could sense Rori. Find where she is. We'll get her back, I said, now surer than ever we would do just that, no matter how long it took or however many assholes we had to fight through to get to her. Thank you for this. I gave her hand another squeeze. She cleared her throat, taking a step back and releasing her grip on my hand. Yeah, sure, anytime. She smiled nervously. I'm going to go inside and see if Agnes needs me for anything. My stomach was suddenly filled with a strange fluttering sensation. A grunt sounded behind me as Chaz lumbered out of the woods, tilting his head to the side as he glanced to the sky. What? Not all of us can turn into a raging bear. Blue and green light swirled around him. He rose up on his hind legs, and his growl turned into a groan as Chaz emerged. No, we can't, he replied. Looked like quite a show. It was. Bruni was called out from the balcony on the second floor of the outpost. That girl is awake. She's calmed down if you want to try and talk to her. Might as well, I said. Chaz nodded, falling in beside me as we entered the outpost. We were almost to the infirmary when Chaz suddenly grabbed his head and fell into the wall. I caught his arm, holding him upright, and asked him what was wrong. Nothing, just a bad headache, he muttered. I'm good, really. You sure? You can go back to your room if you want, and I'll talk to her. No. He got himself upright, squinting at the overhead lights. I'm good. Let's go get some answers, hopefully. He walked off before I could argue with him. He hadn't been hurt during the fight. Had he run into a tree in the woods? I watched him the entire walk to the infirmary, where Bruni waited for us outside the door. Chaz nodded to her, then walked on in. I gave her a worried frown. Her brow furrowed. What's wrong? Not sure, I whispered. Can you feel any wounds in him? His head. She closed her eyes, and I sensed her reaching out gently toward Chaz. His answering growl said he felt it, and then he was back at our side. Bruni beamed at him. He glared. What are you doing? Brogan was worried you hit your head. I didn't, and I'm fine. Can we talk to her now? He shot me a warning look, but there was something wrong with him. He kept squinting against the pain, and rolling his head as if trying to relieve pressure. We slowly approached the girl in the bed at the far end of the room. Her hair was wet from a shower. Now that she was cleaned up, the bruises on her face, arms, neck were all too visible. Chaz's hands closed into fists as he shook with anger. The girl smiled, seeming maybe a year or two younger than I assumed. Her eyes were light blue, just like Rori's, and a flicker of the storm I unleashed outside rushed right back to me. Bruni stood at the foot of the bed and introduced herself with a soft smile. Can you tell me your name? Macy, she replied quietly. Do you remember what happened to you when you were taken? Her face paled and she picked at the sheet. I was with my parents and brother, she whispered. We were out at the park by our house. She rubbed her hand over the back of her right, where the mark of a frost mage was evident. Dad was teaching me some tricks. I was to go off to 4 Point in a few years. My brother was already a recruit, but had come home for a visit. She gulped loudly and shut her eyes, her face scrunched. These men, they just showed up, yelling at my parents. Mom tried to hold them back, but then there was this electrical surge and pain. So much pain. My parents, my brother, I don't know what happened to them, but the men took me away. Just you? I asked. I never saw my family again. This woman kept saying something about tracking down all Frostmage girls. Searching for someone. I had no idea what she was talking about. I frowned as I glanced at Chaz. Tabitha had been searching for Rori, and was taking any girl who was a Frostmage to see if she was the right one. How long ago were you taken, do you remember? She wiped at her eyes hastily, and Bruni hurried to find a box of tissues for the girl. 6 months. Maybe longer. I don't remember much. Everything's fuzzy after. She rubbed her raw wrists. It's all right. You're safe here, I assured her. If you tell us who your parents are, we'll do our best to find them. She nodded, wiping at her face with the tissue. Bruni sat beside her, holding her close. Is there anything else you can remember? We need all the help we can get to find others like you. And our friend, Chaz growled, barely holding it together. She was taken too. Rori, Macy said. Did you see her? Chaz demanded. I shot him a look. He took a deep breath and apologized. We need to find her quickly, he added. It's okay, Macy said with a soft smile and reached for Chaz's hand. You said her name in the cage. Sorry, I went off on you both, by the way. Sometimes guards would come into the cage and beat us, or drag us out for their experiments. Her hand slipped away, and she curled into Bruni's side as if to hide away. I never saw her, I'm sorry. Chaz lowered his head and stalked away from the bed to glare out the window. These guards, you said they're magic users like us? I asked. I asked them over and over why they were doing this to us. None of them answered, she whispered. Their eyes had this strange look, like they were in there fighting against something. She rubbed at her neck, eyes widening. And their necks. They all had the same wound. What do you mean? I asked urgently. It was puckered, almost like a burn, but I'm certain one time I saw something shiny in there. Bruni's eyes darkened. I was pretty sure she came to the same conclusion I did. The Bogards had to have found a way to make magic users submit. This war just got a whole lot darker and harder. If we did attack the main headquarters, would we be fighting the cleansers or our own people? Is there anything else you can tell us? Bruni asked. Take your time. Chaz growled at her last comment but said nothing and continued to stare outside. When I was first taken there, I saw a woman and a man, Macy said slowly. They talked to me, kept asking me questions about my abilities. Wanted to know if I was a necromancer. I told them I had no idea what they were talking about. The woman told me I was a liar. They kept talking about finding someone's daughter. Something about the last piece to the puzzle. The one that would make their coming war a success. I'm sorry. They never said anything else. That's all right, Bruni assured her. Get some rest. We'll see if we can't find your family. She left the tissues for the girl as she settled back down on the bed. We all turned to leave, but Macy called out. Wait. You both saved me. She looked from me to Chaz. Thank you, and I hope you find your friend. Chaz clenched his jaw, barely made any indication he heard her, then was gone. Macy watched him leave, sinking back to her pillows. I am sorry, I wasn't her. It's all right, I told her with a sad smile. He's worried. We all are. He likes her a lot, doesn't he? She said. Bruni cleared her throat and stepped away. I thought over what to say. Yeah, he does. We all care for her, but it's different for him. Macy took another tissue, dabbing at her eyes. I do hope you find her. Thank you, and if you think of anything else, let us know. She closed her eyes, and in a few moments she was asleep. The outpost was well guarded essentially, since we had a full army here now. I knew she'd be safe, but for some reason, I worried about leaving her alone, thinking of how afraid she'd been when we first found her. And Rori, what condition would she be in when we finally managed to rescue her? If we managed to. Not finding her was not an option. That's what we all said, but truthfully, there was always a chance we would never see her again. Or we'd be too late. It would tear me up inside, but after seeing how Chaz reacted minutes ago, it would be the end of him. Whatever he and Rori shared in the void had to have been intense. We need to find Moran, Bruni told me as I joined her and Chaz in the corridor. Tell him what Macy told us. About the Bogards using our own against us. I puffed out my cheeks, shoving my hands in my pockets. Nothing can be easy about this war. Nothing. How are they even doing it? None of our people would willingly listen to them, right? Depends on what they have on each of them, Chaz pointed out. If they're holding family members captive. He shrugged. With all this other technology going on, I wouldn't put it past them to have some way of controlling each person with electrical pulses or some other bullshit. He was right. Macy said it herself, she had no idea where her family was. They could be held captive still. Or they could be dead. If they'd broken her, she might have been turned into one of these controlled guards by using her family against her. Threatening to kill them if she didn't do as she was told. We walked on, tracking down Moran, Blade, and the other commanders in the war room. "Well?" he asked as we entered. "We have some news from one of the rescued victims," I told him. "If you have time." "Always for this shit. What did you find out?" I took a seat with the others and relayed everything Macy gave us to work with. Every word made Moran's gaze darken, and I thought the temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair, spinning away from us all. A few curses slipped from his mouth as he rubbed his temples. "So it comes down to a fight against an enemy that is using our own people against us," Moran muttered as he turned back around and rose to his feet. "Do we have any word at all on where these other locations might be?" "Which one is their headquarters?" he asked Blade. "We're still going through the files and computers we recovered," Blade replied. "So far nothing." "Keep looking. I want someone working on it at all times." "Understood." Blade bowed his head and exited the room, the commanders leaving with him. "You three, rest and ensure you're on point. We have no way of knowing when they might retaliate once they realize what we've done. This is far from over. They have our people, and I will not stop until we have them back. Every last one of them. You have my word on that. I swear it." Chaz said nothing, just slipped out of the room, appearing to still be in pain. Bruni and I left. There was nothing left to talk about, not until we had another lead to follow up on. There were plenty of prisoners to interrogate, but I doubted we'd be able to hold onto them long. The government was demanding they be handed over by tomorrow morning, giving us no time to get much out of them. I wandered with Bruni to the mess to eat, but Chaz was nowhere in sight. I'd track him down later and make sure he was actually all right. Night had settled in, and there'd been no sign of Chaz since our meeting with Moran. Bruni and I split up to search for him after checking his room and finding it empty. He wasn't in the infirmary or anywhere inside. This left the woods. Moran put a ban on any of us going outside at night. Leave it to Chaz to ignore the man's orders. Again. Bruni and I stepped outside, sighing in unison. "You want to wait here for him to come back? Or go find him?" she asked. I glanced at the two men guarding the door. "Have you seen Chaz?" They both shook their heads. "He's not supposed to be out there." "We know, it's why we're out here." "We can't let you go wandering around," the second guard said. "Moran will have our hides if he knows all three of you are out here." "I know, but we need to find him." I squinted into the darkness of the trees. "You can stay here and wait for him." "You two are not going into the woods," the first guard ordered. "If he's not back in 10 minutes, we'll send someone out to look for him." I gave in and stood with Bruni, waiting. Minutes ticked by. I paced back and forth, muttering under my breath for Chaz to get his ass back to the outpost before anything happened, but there was no sign of him. At 10 minutes, the guards radioed for extra men. I asked them not to reveal that Chaz was gone over the radio. The last thing we needed when Chaz got back was Moran out here, ripping him a new one for being so reckless. The guards were sending 3 men out when branches crunched in the darkness. The sound of a muffled groan followed. "Chaz!" I called out. The groan turned into a growl. He sounded like he was hurt. Ignoring the guard's commands to wait, Bruni and I took off toward the woods. A shadow that looked like Chaz emerged from the trees. Then a bright flash of green and blue light brought me to a stop in the wet grass, throwing my arm out to stop Bruni and the guards. "Chaz!" He was there in bear form, limping as if hurt, but then he growled, shaking out his head as his body reverted back to human form. He took another step, then 2 more, then fell forward on his face. We rushed to his side. I rolled him over. Bruni's hands glowed gold as she pressed them to his head. "There's something wrong with his magic," she whispered, eyes closed. "Physically he's fine, but I sense a weakening in him." I thought back to the house, wondering if he'd gotten hurt after all, and I hadn't noticed, but then realized with a sickening feeling what this was. "The oath he made," I muttered. "It's starting to take its toll." "Oath? What oath?" Bruni demanded. Not here, I said as the two guards approached. What happened? Was he attacked? No, but we're going to take him inside. Think he's worn out from the fight this morning, I lied. Bruni pursed her lips, narrowed eyes, saying I better tell her exactly what was going on once we were away from the guards. Between me and another guard, we got Chaz up, and inside the outpost without being spotted by Moran or Agnes. Once inside his room, I thanked the guard and shut the door, leaving me and Bruni alone with Chaz. I gave her the brief rundown on what Chaz did. Several interesting and vivid curses fell out of her mouth. Sorry. No, it's pretty much the same reaction we had. I never thought it would affect him so soon. Chaz groaned as his eyes fluttered open. That sucked. What happened out there? I helped him sit upright as he shook out his head. Hey. You here or what? Yeah, I'm here. He rubbed a hand down his face, shoving me to get up, and trudged into the bathroom. He slammed the door. Then the toilet flushed and water ran, after which he stepped back out, hair wet and face still a mess. Care to share what's going on with you? He shrugged. Sure you figured it out by now. The oath is draining your power. Looks like it. He held out his hand before his face. Can't hold my bear form anymore. What? Bruni and I snapped at the same time. Seriously. I added. Damn it, Chaz. This is why you don't do stupid shit like run around and make oaths with your powers on the line. He glowered at me for a solid minute, then lowered his eyes and weakly walked to his bed. You're right, he muttered. I was an idiot, and today I pushed myself too hard with my anger, let it get away from me. If you can't take bear form anymore, it's only a matter of time before you're limited on what else you can do. I didn't need to ask if he wanted to hide this from Moran. He'd flip if he learned the truth we'd been hiding for months now. I suggest you limit your power usage until we need it. Sounds like an excellent plan. Chaz, I snapped. What? I get it. I messed up. I won't use them unless I have to. Happy? No. I'll be happy when we kill those 6 psychos who started this mess. We have Rori back and you're back to normal. I marched out of the room with Bruni, warning Chaz that I'd sick Agnes on him if he did anything else that was stupid. Without his bear form, Chaz was still strong, but it was a sign of how much he was about to lose and how quickly. We needed to find Rori, and fast. Maybe with all 4 of us together, we could slow the process down.
Chapter 6. Rori. Blood spurted from my nose. I fell backward, thrown off balance by an icy wind. Again. I wiped the blood from my face, even spat some out, as I glared across the room at the man that used to be Trevor Griffith. For days we'd been at it, sparring for hours and hours. My power was slowly coming back to me, but I was playing this smart. No way in hell was I going to show Tabitha and Simon everything I could do. Oh no. I was going to drag this out as long as I could, make their plan take weeks. Months if I could. I would make them regret taking me prisoner, and breaking my father down. Then when they were weak and distracted, pissed off and vulnerable, then I'd return the favor. I'd break them. At least that was the plan. And it was most likely not going to work. Not even close. I glanced upward to find the bow-guards speaking to white-clad men and a few guards. Every now and then, they shifted their gazes my way. No emotion ever showed on their faces, aside from aggravation at my lack of progress. Every time I was on the way here, and on the way back at the end of the day, I asked the same shaman to give me more information. Each time, he refused to say a word. I'd been tasered more than once, for opening my mouth and cursing them all for keeping me here like a caged animal. Just yesterday, Tabitha had 2 of the guards beat me up for spitting at her. It had been worth it yesterday. But today my ribs ached, and my right shoulder kept making this weird clicking sound. I was pretty sure that was a bad sign. I said again, Dad snapped as ice formed around his hands. I am not back to my full strength yet, I snapped. What do you want me to do? Get back to your full strength. My job is to train you, and that is exactly what I'm going to do, no matter how hard I have to hit to wake you up. Ice flew at me. I ducked, rolling back to my feet and swinging around with a kick aimed at his face. The kick landed, but then he reached around, grabbed me and spun me into the far wall. I grunted as I smashed into it, shaking out my head. I barely had a split second to react to the fist coming at me. First, I jabbed him hard in the ribs, then followed it up with a kick to the chest. He slid backward but stayed upright. He was my dad. I knew that, but right then beating the shit out of him sounded like a damned good idea. Though I held back my magic. I did not have to hold back my hand-to-hand moves. And after learning we could be without our powers during a fight, Brogan, Chaz and I had specifically trained for exactly this type of situation. I released all my anger at the Bogards and charged forward, dodging each ice attack to get in close, jabbing him in the jaw, following it up with an elbow to his gut, then a fist into his nose. He cursed and made a wild grab for me, but I was smaller and much faster. "Use your magic," he shouted as I came after him again, ducking in quick to attack, then slipping out of reach again. "Fight like a mage." "Why?" I shouted back. "What's the point?" His eyes flared violet, and the magic at his hands changed from ice to violet-tinged shadows. They pulsed in time with his anger, then lashed out at me. Deep within me, my own power wanted to respond, but I forced it to stay hidden, not ready to reveal all I could do. I'd been testing it out in my room. In the shower stall, actually, since I had no doubt there was a camera in my room, waiting for me to do something while thinking I was alone. I flattened as a bolt of shadow flew across the room and smashed into the wall, breaking away the white paint, and created a rotting hole in the stone beneath. The low hum of voices overhead silenced as Dad used his necromancy. Tabitha's face was expectant. Clearly, she believed this to be the moment my true colors would emerge. Not going to happen. I gritted my teeth and prepared to get my ass kicked again. A whisper of anger flooded my mind, but I mentally yelled at it to shut up. Dad wasn't going to kill me. I hoped. The attacks increased, and a bolt of shadow caught my right shoulder. I screamed as the immediate sensation of being burned swarmed me, making me miss the chance to block a fist aiming for my face. Next thing I knew, I was on the ground and staring up at the ceiling, waiting for it to all be over. Dad stalked around me, spitting curses and yelling, but I tuned him out. That man was not my dad, not really. When we fought, I strove to get a good look at his neck, but there were no markings on there to indicate anything embedded in his skin. If I could get Dad to wake up, to understand what he was doing, if I pushed him hard enough, maybe that tiny hint of familiarity I caught the first day would grow and he would snap out of it. "Get up," he snarled. "Why?" I held my shoulder and grimaced. "Because that is what's expected of you. Get up and fight me." He blasted the floor to the left of my head. I flinched but made no move to get my ass off the floor. "Get up, or there will be pain. Is that what you want? Is it?" "I'm already in pain," I yelled. "This man you think you are now? It's not you." His brow furrowed. He raised his gaze to the balcony. Whatever he saw there put a new resolve in his eyes, and he blasted the floor to the right of my head, catching the tip of my ear and searing it. "You will get up and you will fight." "Or what? You won't kill me, and you won't hurt me as badly as you think you will." As if to prove me wrong, a third bolt struck to my left, nearly catching my hand. Thank goodness I'd moved it. His eyes glimmered with fury, but beneath it all I saw hesitation. Just enough to tell me I hadn't been crazy when I noticed him staring at me with a look of awareness. "I'm your daughter," I hissed. "Remember? I am your daughter, and you're my dad, and you are not going to kill me. But you need to snap out of it. This isn't you. You should be fighting them, not working for them." His lip curled up as he made to strike again, but suddenly his eyes clouded over and he gave his head a shake. I sat up, hoping I'd gotten through to him, but then the violet power was back in his gaze and he shook his head. "I have no child," he whispered fiercely. I tried to keep arguing, but then a bright flash of violet light filled my vision and I was out. When my vision cleared, my head was throbbing and I was rocking back and forth. My eyes fluttered open. I was facing the floor, arms dangling as the shaman guard carried me. What happened? I tried to say, but it came out garbled. Wouldn't try to talk, he said quietly, and a quick glance around revealed we were almost alone, except one other magic user. You took a hit to the head. My limbs were shaky, and when he set me on my feet outside my door, my legs gave out completely. He caught me before I collapsed and reached around me to open the door. With his help, I made it to the bed and plopped down, holding my face as I recalled the last thing I saw before there was nothing at all. My Trevor knocked me out? He did, but it could have been much worse. Really? Pretty sure he almost killed me. My chest ached from more than just his attack. I realized I might not be able to get through to Dad after all. I hated to admit he was lost and I'd failed, but what do you mean it could have been worse? You're conscious, and it's only been about 10 minutes. I've seen him attack others the way he did you, the shaman said, throwing a glance toward the door. The mage waved him on. He was keeping watch, so we could have an actual conversation. Most others wouldn't have awoken as quickly as you did, or been in one piece. He pointed at my shoulder. I reached up, remembering I'd been hurt. Both there and on my ear. But both wounds were healed. The shaman nodded. I felt what he did, giving you of his life force to heal you faster. I shoved the shoulder of my shirt aside, really studying the wound. He did that. He did. That last hit was mostly bright flashes of light, no real damage, at least not to you. The floor is a different story. The pain in my head was clearing away, as was the fog. What's your name? He hesitated. I grabbed his hand. Please, I would like to stop calling you Bob inside my head. He gave me a look. I had nothing else to go on. I managed a chagrined smile. He returned the smile for half a second as he mumbled, Jake. My dad doesn't have this in his neck as you do, I whispered. What did they do to him? Years of torture can do many things to a man. Whatever they did to his mind, he doesn't seem to remember anything about his life before. At least until you came, I'd hazard a guess. I need to wake him up. To snap him out of it. I glanced at my hands as my fingers frosted over. Jake raised his brow. I grinned. What? You think I haven't been able to call up my powers at all? I quickly stopped it, not letting it get out of hand for whoever might be monitoring my room with surveillance cameras. I'm so close to being able to call my staff. And his. A new burst of hope shot through me. I have his staff. Jake perked up. Can you summon it? I haven't been able to get mine yet, but if I have more time, if I can keep convincing them that I'm weaker than I am, I might be able to get it to him. If Dad could hold his staff, the focus for his power, if he could grasp it and use it, would that be enough to jar him awake? From what Jake said, there was a part of him that knew who I was and would not hurt me too badly. I could take the beatings if it meant bringing Dad back. And once he was back, the two of us could bust out of here. If this works, I said barely in a whisper to Jake, I want you to come with us. All of you. Jake sighed heavily and rubbed his neck where the metal was. We can't leave. If we do, they can track us, and I don't know how to remove this from my neck. We'll be all right. If you two can escape, you'll throw off her master plan, give us all a chance to be rescued later. Do you know where we are? Only things I remember are mountains and trees. What? I frowned. Grayson said the last thing he remembered was it being hot, which meant I was somewhere completely different. If Chaz and the others were looking for me, they might be headed farther south and west than I actually was, which meant their chances of finding me grew slimmer by the day. I need a freaking map, a way to get back to the outpost in Idaho. I can't help with that, I'm afraid, Jake said solemnly. No, it's fine. You've done more than enough. I wanted to try and summon Dad's staff right away, but if I were to make this plan work, I had to time everything perfectly. Jake, these people, the Bogards, why are they doing this? Doing what? The experiments? That. The war. All of it. What did we do to them that made them hate us so much? I wish I had answers to give you, but I don't. Jake, the mage at the door hissed. Whatever you think you can do to bring your father back, better do it sooner than later, Jake said. Then he and the mage were gone, locking me in my room for another long evening and night of figuring out how I was going to get out of this mess. I placed the ice pack to my head 2 days later, and wiped the blood from my face with a clean towel one of the guards threw at me. Dad was already gone, and I was nursing my wounds on the floor, not ready to get up yet. The last 2 days had been hard. Every time Dad attacked, my powers pushed to fight back, and I had to argue with myself so I wouldn't show what I could do. Which then of course distracted me from the fight, and I wound up on my ass. Repeatedly. Resting my head back against the wall, I closed my eyes and wondered if my plan was actually going to work or if I was falling prey to the insanity that currently surrounded me. Part of me said it was all in my head, but I knew when Dad pushed the attack this time, he'd hesitated toward the end. You can't hold out forever, Tabitha said. I squinted open one eye enough to see her standing over me, arms crossed and frowning. You think so, huh? I know so. Sooner or later, you will break, and your powers will reveal themselves to me. Whatever game you're playing, you will lose. Even if we have to break every bone in your body. Even if you wind up bleeding out on the floor time and time again, you will show your true power to us. You know your threats all sound the same after a while, I mumbled, making my lips split open again. The strong metal taste of blood filled my mouth, but I ignored it. After a while, if you keep threatening people with pain and death, blah 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 gets tiring, you know? She turned to the guard, and that damn taser came out again. I braced for it, but he made no move to use it yet. Pain will always yield the same results, once we find the right combination. Sure, whatever you say, psycho. Her lip curled in a sneer, and this time the guard bent down and nailed me right in the side. I screamed at the jolts, shocking my body. Then he pulled back, and I was left panting for air. What the hell did we ever do to you? Huh. I yelled at her. What? You jealous or something? Did some guy break your heart when you were younger? What did we do to make you hate us so much? To turn you into a damned killer? The guard raised his hand to hit me again, but Tabitha stopped him, and he obediently backed away. She knelt beside me, reaching out. I patted myself on the back for not flinching away from this monster. I expected her to slap me or something, but instead, she took the ice pack from my hand and moved it. I frowned, wondering what game she was playing, when I saw the deep sadness suddenly filled her eyes. I was a mother once upon a time, she whispered. I failed to hide my look of shock. Not all monsters start out as monsters. Who was this woman? I found nothing to say, so kept my mouth shut for once. I had 2 children. A boy and a girl. They were smart, loving. We were a happy family. Her eyes darkened, and she set the ice pack aside, taking the towel from me and dabbing at the cuts in my bloodied lip. Then one day, we were at a park and a man arrived. He was a druid, we saw the marking on his hand. Back then I never feared magic or hated it. That day everything changed. She lowered her hand and sat back, not seeing me anymore. He attacked out of nowhere. For no reason. My children, when I woke up in the hospital, Simon and my children, we learned the children didn't make it. My heart plummeted. Did I hate this woman? Absolutely. But damn, she lost her kids. It was shitty. Did it give her an excuse to be a raging bitch though? No, not even close. They got the guy, right? Caught him and killed him for what he did? She shrugged. We never heard about him again. There was no trial, no chance for closure, so we did our best to move on. But we couldn't. The man who murdered my children just disappeared. Until one day I saw him again. He was walking around, without a care in the world. As if he hadn't killed countless people. You reported him, right? I asked, confused, not sure how that was possible. We tried, called it in, but then the man was gone again and we were told we'd been seeing things. That we were trying to find a villain in any magic user. She hung her head, but there were no tears in her eyes. A year passed, then two. We found ourselves at a support group for other parents who lost their children. If not for the bloody towel she was holding, I would have thought this was all a dream and we were two acquaintances having a sad but normal conversation. While there, we met others like us who had lost their children to incidents of magic. It was there we learned the dark, dirty secret of your society. Your people cover their tracks well. Name after name we tracked down of ones murdered by magic users, and the culprits just up and disappeared. We had no way of knowing if they were alive or dead. Or locked away. And when we asked, we were turned away, told we were crazy. Conspiracy nuts. Fanatics. So we did the only thing we could think of. Organized protests and started a movement that would change this country. Her gaze hardened as she tossed the towel back in my lap. Change it and save it from your kind. Look, not every society is perfect, and clearly the system's broken, I said, trying to sound rational, even though in the back of my mind I was wondering how any of that could be true. Would the commanders really cover up these acts of murderers? Tabitha, you can't actually think it's fair to punish all of us. We can help uncover the truth. We can make this work without killing any more innocents. But she stood and brushed her hands down her white coat. It's too late for second chances. So you're going to kill others' loved ones? For revenge? How is that justice? I am ridding this world of evil, she snapped. Of a kind that brings death and destruction. This war will be the end of you all, thanks to you and your father. Once you break, and you will, I promise you that, the battle to end all magic will commence. She shook her head at me sadly. You think you and your kind are so clever, but you all failed to see the obvious answer. And what's that? I snapped angrily, pushing to my feet so I could stare her down on level terms. What? Your kind should have stayed in the dark, stayed away from us. Now we will do what is necessary. There are too many of us to take us all out, and we are everywhere. She moved closer, grasping my chin in her fingers. We will hunt your type down to extinction, and then at the end of it all, you and your father can die together as a family. Take her to her room. She shoved me into the guard, who grabbed me harshly and tossed me out through the door ahead of him. Back in my room, I cleaned up my face the best I could, all the while wondering how much of what Tabitha told me was true. No one wanted to believe their government could be capable of something as terrible as covering up the murders of innocents. But she hadn't sounded crazy when she told me her story. She'd sounded perfectly sane. Upset and angry, but sane. I had to get back to the outpost and share this information with Moran and the others, figure out if it was true or not. Then we had to find all these others she claimed were everywhere. I assumed she meant they had people inside the government, probably how they'd been able to find magic users and take them. Was that how they knew about Dad, or had it been an accident they found out about him? Mind racing, I paced from one end of the small room to the other, waiting for time to speed up, but it never changed. I was running out of time to get to Dad and make him wake up. When my dinner arrived, I waited for the guard to leave and locked the door, counted out another 5 minutes to be sure he was gone, then ducked into the bathroom. I turned the water on, but stayed out of the spray and closed my eyes. Power welled up within me, pent-up energy from not using it during all this time of fighting against Dad. It needed an outlet, and as I lifted my right hand, I said a little prayer that this would work and snapped my fingers. Finally, I whispered, excited to find my staff back in my hand, the stone glowing and ready. A familiar voice whispered in my mind, but I ignored her for now and thought of another, snapped my fingers again without thinking, and was suddenly crammed into the shower stall with a very large, half-dead wolf. Merlin. His tongue lolled out of the undead side of his mouth as he nuzzled my leg, thrilled to be here at my side. This was good. My staff and my familiar were within my reach. I leaned my staff against the wall and thought of Dad's. I snapped my fingers a third time, and it was there in my grip. Now all I had to do was find a way to get it to him. It was not going to be easy, and there was a chance my shitty plan would go terribly wrong, but I had to do something. I looked at Merlin, who bobbed his furry head. "It's going to get messy," I told him. "Help me get there? I need to talk to you both. You and her." Merlin's eyes flared blue. My body relaxed, and then I was floating away from the bathroom. I blinked and found myself standing on the blue path surrounding the violet where the shadow figure stood, tapping her foot impatiently. "It's about damn time," she said. "Well? I have a plan, and I need to make sure we're all on the same page," I told her, happy to see the human version of Merlin standing at my side. "I have to get Dad his staff. It's the only way to get him out of here. Or you could let me take over and drain them all, here and now. And be done with it. And what's to say you get them all, or you don't kill the wrong person?" I demanded. Dad had the chance to do the same, but he refused because the risks were too high. "The plan is to get him his staff, break the hold over his mind, and then get out of here back to the outpost. If we can reach them, we can come back and save everyone." "Getting out won't be easy," Merlin warned, "but I'm in the mood to bite a few asses." "And you?" I asked the shadow. "I need to know you will follow my lead on this." She sighed heavily, then shrugged. "As long as we get out of here, and maybe take out a few guards in the process. Then fine, I'll behave. Just not the magic users. They're victims in this too. Only because they refuse to fight." "No, because they choose for the ones they love to live," I argued. "We do this tomorrow, and I have to be as strong as I possibly can be." "We've got your back," Merlin promised. "Get some sleep. You're going to need it." The shadow nodded in agreement, and made no other argument. I let myself slip back to my body in the shower, found Merlin gone, but the staves there. I feared if I sent them away too, they'd never come back, but there was no way to sneak out of my room with them. I snapped my fingers and they both disappeared. "Until tomorrow," I told myself. "One more day, Dad. Just one more and then we're out of here." Chapter 7. Rori. I walked into the white room where Dad waited for me, my head held high, doing everything I could to not give myself away. Thinking of Chaz and the serious face he always wore, I did the same. Or close enough. The guard stepped back to the door, and a quick look up revealed Tabitha and Simon were there, as well as a handful of other people in white lab coats, guards and more magic users. From their serious looks, it appeared I wasn't the only one up to something today. I let out a deep breath to get control of my nerves and shook out my hands. "Are you ready to begin?" Dad asked in that growling voice that was not his. "Yeah, let's get this party started, old man," I muttered and then lunged across the room, nailing him in the face without giving him a chance to move. I kept up the attack, throwing everything I had into it, not letting him use his power against me, at least not yet. If I could get the others to believe this was like any other day, they would turn their attention away. As the fighting raged on, I chanced to look up. They'd all turned their backs. Perfect. Dad aimed a punch at my face, but I caught his arm and pinned it to his back. "You have to listen to me," I said quietly but urgently. "You have to remember who you are, so we can get out of here." "You are delusional," he snarled, flipping me over. "Enough of this nonsense." I was worried my pent-up power would hurt him, and hoped I'd somehow get to break through without using magic, but it looked like if this was going to work, it'd have to be done the hard way. Frost covered my hands and as I whirled around, creating an icy storm cloud. I snapped my fingers and my staff appeared in my hands. Just as Tabitha yelled a warning, I slammed it down with a shout, and the cloud exploded, shrouding me and Dad from the others. Shadows flowed through it, blocking the two of us from the guards reaching in, giving me the precious few seconds I needed. "What is this?" Dad asked, confused, panic and anger in his eyes. "Your power, this is incredible." "Yeah, it is because I got it from you. You are my dad and you have to come with me." "You want to leave? I can't let you do that." "You are my dad, Trevor Griffith. Your wife is Jody Griffith. We have missed you for a very long time. And we love you." "Dad, please," I begged, holding out one hand. The other hand gripped around my staff kept the storm going. Remember. Come with me. Shadows formed around his hands as he shook his head, taking a half step back. No. Fine. You leave me no choice then. I snapped my fingers and his staff appeared in my left hand. His eyes went to it immediately and he froze. This is yours. I want you to take it. He shook his head again, but the confusion in his eyes told me he remembered something. He blinked and then his hand rose, ready to take the staff. When he was a few inches from it, he hesitated. Tabitha was screaming. Get in there. We need to see what's happening. What are you doing? Dad froze, hanging his head. He grunted as though in pain. I can't. Yes, you can. I urged. Take it. Steps rushed around us. Any second now, someone was going to break through my magic. I might have been able to summon Merlin and the two staves, but this level of intensity wouldn't last forever. Already, I was weakening from using so much magic so quickly, after being cut off from it for so long. Don't listen to her, I told him as Tabitha yelled his name. Listen to me. Listen to yourself. Take the staff. He clutched his head, groaning and cursing. Then he raised it, eyes glowing a bright violet, his lip lifted in a snarl. My heart sank, thinking I'd lost my chance and this was it. This was when my world officially would crash down around me, but then Dad threw himself forward and grabbed his staff. The second his hand made contact, a burst of ice and shadow exploded from his center, reinforcing the storm around us. His eyes cleared and he stumbled but stayed upright, gasping for air. He blinked, eyes wildly going from the staff then to me, and he narrowed his gaze. Rori? Dad? He rushed me, hugging me close. There was no time for a proper reunion. We have to get out of here. I know where the exit is, he told me, wiping quickly at his eyes. We have to move fast, and I'm not sure how strong I am. You're kidding, right? The power I've been using, it was such a high intensity for short bursts. I won't last long in a full-on fight against them. I wouldn't either. Great. I snapped my fingers and Merlin shimmered into sight beside me. Dad smiled at the sight of the wolf, closed his eyes and snapped his fingers too. The creature that appeared beside him was more impressive, to say the least. We get out of this room and we head left, take the stairs up, then straight on out the exit. Do you know where we are? I asked as the storm around us started to calm. We'll have to figure it out once we're out of here. Ready? Not like we have much of a choice. He took hold of my hand. Our power flowed freely from him to me and back again, but he was right. Our window was limited. Whatever fog he'd been living in for the last decade plus may have lifted, but his power was all over the place and quickly wearing him out. Tabitha shouted for someone to grab a grenade and make ready. I held my breath. Time seemed to slow around us. Dad squeezed my hand. Tabitha gave the go-ahead to attack. Dad and I shouted, breaking through the ice storm with a flurry of shadows that lashed out and drained any being they touched. Men scattered. Tabitha screamed. Both our familiars charged at her from the depths of the storm, my wolf and Dad's polar bear. The beasts roared. Dad and I moved as one, pushing back the guards with a wall of ice, smashing them to the other side, then sprinting for the door. I whistled. Merlin and the bear came bounding after us. Tabitha continued to scream. On an impulse that could only be attributed to the shadow, I whirled around and slammed my staff into the ground. The staff stone shifted from blue to violet as life-sucking energy shot toward her, catching her wrists and lifting her off the floor. Rori? There's no time. Dad yelled. I hardly heard him. I eyed her darkly, waiting to see the fear in her eyes as I drained her of life. Guards were shouting orders and steps thundered closer. We'd be surrounded before long, but I had to do this. Kill her and save everyone else that she intended to harm. But as the shadows continued to surround her body, she smiled. When she laughed, I frowned, not sure if I was that weak or if something else was going on I didn't understand. You truly believe I would start a war against your kind, with no way to protect myself? Tabitha snapped. Your magic will not harm me. Not now. Not ever. Rori, Dad whispered, gripping my shoulder. My magic might not be able to drain her, but I could still knock her out. With a smirk, I moved my staff to the right, and the shadows launched her through the viewing glass on the second story. Her scream of pain would have to suffice for now. I turned and ran with Dad, sticking close to him as we charged through the compound. The guards had formed a line near the exit, ready to take us down. A yell sounded, and Jake was suddenly there with more magic users, tackling the men to the ground to give us our chance to escape. A guard yelled a code red, and all the magic users cried out, jerking from the shocks of electricity rushing through their bodies. I wanted to help them, but Jake was right. I had to get out, get back to the outpost, then come back and save them all. We burst outside to find it was night. A siren wailed, but we never slowed down. Merlin ran up next to me, and then I was on his back as Dad's bear did the same for him. A fence rose from the ground. I yelled, thinking we were trapped, but then Merlin launched us over it. The four of us cleared the base and took off into the night, heading as far away from the compound as we could, toward any sign of civilization. Our familiars ran and ran, until the sound of the siren finally faded away, and our power could no longer sustain their presence. I sent Merlin away. The polar bear nudged Dad in the chest. He hugged its neck, then it too disappeared. Only then did Dad actually look at me. And then we were hugging, and he kept saying he was sorry over and over for what he put me through. For what happened the whole time he'd been gone. He was crying. Then I was crying. And then we ended up sitting in the grass beneath the trees, talking and laughing, then crying again. We were exhausted, our power was slipping away from us, and it would take days to recharge. We have to keep moving, Dad finally said. Where did you say? Idaho, I told him as he helped me up. But I have no idea where we are. Then we find a road, follow it to town and go from there. He cupped my face in his hand and sighed. So much time I missed out on with you. With your mom. His eyes widened and he cursed. She's going to kill me when I get back to her. I beamed at him, knowing he was probably right. We have to end a war first. You are an elite guard with my abilities. Damn it. I'm sorry I wasn't there to teach you any of this. I know, but it's not exactly your fault. I covered his hand with mine. We end this, then we'll have all the time in the world to make up for lost time, right? Tears burned in my eyes. He wiped at his again, nodding. Right, you're right. I'm proud of you, kiddo, so damn proud. Together, we found north and started walking, hoping we'd find a road to follow and get our asses back to the outpost and to safety. Chapter 8. Rori. Feet aching, I sighed in relief when we finally spotted lights from cars after at least 3 hours of walking. Dad was growing weaker with every step, and he wasn't going to make it however much further it was to a town, at least not on foot. My own power waning, I summoned my staff, and when a truck came down the road, I placed my hand to the ground and summoned a wall of ice. The truck screeched as the driver slammed on the brakes, staring around wildly. I stepped out from my hiding place. The guy spotted me and frowned. What the hell are you doing, girl? He snapped. Trying to kill someone? I need your truck, I said. And I need to know where we are. He laughed at me. You think I'm going to answer you because you have magic? Piss off, he muttered, flashing his druid mark at me. Look, I'm an elite guard. I need to know where we are. He eyed me up and down, shaking his head. No, you're not. I shouldn't have done it, already at the edge of my strength, but this guy was pissing me off. After everything I'd been through trying to put an end to this war against him and the rest of our kind, he was going to seriously stand there and give me shit? I said nothing but snapped my fingers. Merlin appeared behind the guy, and I smirked as he bit him right in the ass. The guy took off running and cursing as Merlin chased after him. Thanks. Asshole, I muttered, then went back into the trees. Dad was barely conscious, leaning against a tree. "Come on, found us a ride." "What did you do?" he asked as he draped an arm around my shoulders, and I guided him to the road. "Don't ask. Just get in." Merlin came back by the time I got Dad settled, and I thanked him, then snapped my fingers. He disappeared, and I searched around the truck for any indication of where we are. In the center console was a map of Oregon, matching what the plate said, and when I poked around more, found the guy's cell phone. Dad grunted in pain, but when I glanced over, his eyes were shut. "Hang on, Dad," I whispered, pulling up the GPS to see where we were exactly. I had no address for the outpost in Idaho, but I had a general area. I searched how to get there the best I could, then tossed the guy's cell out the window. I threw the truck in drive, backed up, turned us around, hoping the almost full tank of gas would get us close to our destination. The red light popped on as the gas gauge slipped to E. "No, damn it, come on." I smacked my hands against the wheel, but that was it. The truck was out of gas. I got us onto the shoulder, then it stopped completely. From what I could tell, we were an hour away from the outpost. Possibly closer, maybe further, there was no real way to tell. I'd been looking at the map every so often, but I was beyond tired now. My limbs were heavy as I forced myself out of the truck and around to Dad's side. He hadn't woken up yet, and as I shook him now, he opened his eyes for a second, then passed right back out. When I snapped my fingers, my power flared, then cut off as if shorted out. I cursed, took a few breaths, then snapped them again, grimacing from the amount of energy it took to summon Merlin again. He appeared, whining as he nudged my side. "I can't leave my father," I told him. "I need you to get to the outpost," I whispered. "Find Chaz and Brogan, bring them to me, all right?" I had no way to know if he would make it or not. If the power I summoned him with would be enough, but I had no other choice. After I got Dad out of the truck, I got his arm around my shoulders and walked along the side of the two-lane road in the middle of nowhere. It was all I could do to put one foot in front of the other, talking to myself and Dad, talking about anything I could just to keep going. My wounds from the last few weeks burned and ached, but I pushed onward. My magic dwindled more and more, until I suddenly sensed nothing at all inside me. No cold. No shadow. Nothing. At some point, I realized I was rambling about Mom and the bakery. A while later, I realized I had tears running down my cheeks without even knowing why I was crying. Not that I was crying really, just tired. So damn tired. I veered off the road and into the trees, not even sure where I was going at this point. I walked and walked. Dad stumbled along beside me. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew I should have collapsed by now, and what drove me on now, I had no freaking idea. But I just kept on walking, letting my feet guide me. I paused, hearing the wind rustle the leaves overhead, and the chilly air of the overcast day sent a shiver down my spine. I felt the cold, and that, if nothing else, was a bad sign. A whisper of a familiar voice said my name, but we were alone in the woods with no way of knowing how far away safety was. My vision blurred, and then we were falling over into the leaves. I reached for Dad's hand, holding it securely in my grip as I fought to keep my eyes open. It was a lost cause. Every part of my body was weak and defeated. I closed my eyes, waiting to be found by Tabitha and her guards, then dragged right back to that damn cage. I waited, quietly apologizing to everyone I'd just failed. Leaves crunched and I flinched, but my eyes stayed closed. Had to be an animal of some kind. Or Tabitha. I willed my eyes to open, to see what was going on around us, but my body didn't obey. The crunching increased, and then there was yelling. "Here. Over here." That voice, I knew that voice, didn't I? Rori. It's her. She's here. Chaz? I thought I said his name, but all that came out was a croak. Hands were reaching for me, smoothing back the hair from my face. I blinked but couldn't focus. "Hold on, just hold on," Chaz whispered urgently, scooping me up in his arms. He'd found us. Somehow. Merlin, he must have made it. I smiled, knowing we were saved, then everything went dark around me. The only thing I felt was Chaz holding me close. Everywhere there were shadows, but not dark or scary. They were peaceful, comforting. The temptation to stay wrapped up in them forever sounded like a great idea, but I couldn't do that. Why couldn't I? I was supposed to do something important. Dad. I'd found him, right? Or had that all been a messed up nightmare, part of Tabitha's torture? A shudder raced through me that turned into uncontrollable shaking. My whole body seized up in pain and I screamed. This was it, I'd been taken captive by her after all. They were going to torture me again and again. Rori, calm down. Grab her. Hold her down before she hurts herself. Careful. Her powers are flaring. A warmth spread over me, but I twisted away from it, not sure I could trust it. I screamed again, flailing. Then the shaking took total control of my body. Ice poured out of my limbs, followed by a rush of shadow that was bound to hurt someone. I tried to tell them to get away from me, that I had no control over myself at all, but the words were lodged behind another scream of pain. Knock her out. Do it. Quick. A warm hand pressed to my forehead, and then I was back in the shadows. I found myself standing on the blue path surrounding the violet. For once, the shadow didn't appear annoyed with me. A hand rested on my shoulder. I turned my head. Merlin. He hugged me as tightly as I did him. You did it. I did. I shimmered out about 2 miles away from you, but they found you. You're safe, Rori. You and your dad are safe. I sighed, leaning into him. I wasn't sure if I was or not. I didn't hurt anyone, did I? No, they're fine. So is Tabitha, the shadow muttered. You do remember what happened right before we escaped, right? You saw what she did. Or didn't do, I should say. My magic, it couldn't hurt her, I whispered. How is that possible? I don't know, but with everything else going on, you can't forget that. She won't be easy to stop, and I bet her husband is the same way. Am I so messed up you think I won't remember? Merlin and the shadow exchanged a look. For the first time ever, a face appeared on the shadow, just enough for me to see both sides of my power were worried about me. You've been running on adrenaline, on the hope of escaping. Now that you're out, everything's going to come back to you. If you're not careful, it'll cripple you. Just want you to remember what's important. After that, you can fall apart. I won't fall apart, I insisted, but my words were shaky. It's okay, Merlin assured me. We'll be right here for you, as will the rest of your team. Just don't shut them out. Or us, the shadow warned. Now wake up, Rori. Time to face reality again. The sensation of falling overwhelmed me, and then my eyes were fluttering open. The room was dim. I was lying in a comfortable bed with soft blankets and wearing fresh clothes. When I reached up to push my hair back, it was braided again, like I always wore it, in 2 long ones that came past my shoulders. Slowly I pushed myself up, but my arms gave out and I grunted in pain. A chair scooted and then Chaz was there, carefully reaching for my hand. Rori? Chaz? Yup. You're safe. Back at the outpost, he told me quietly. I tried to sit up again, but he gently pushed me back down. Save your strength. There's no hurry for you to get up. I sagged against the pillow, squeezing his hand. I opened my mouth to say something, but then I came apart at the seams. Tears streamed down my face, and he was there, holding me close as I cried over what I'd been through the last few weeks. The pain, the torture, the constant fighting with Dad while that bitch and her husband watched, waiting for me to break. Chaz ran his hand over my braids, whispering soothing words I didn't really hear, but they helped calm me down. He asked me nothing. Not that I could have said anything right then anyway. It was enough to have him there, his arms wrapped around me. After a while I dozed off again, but when I woke, Chaz was still there, keeping me close to his side. He was sitting up in bed, talking quietly to someone else in the room. Sounded like Agnes. I kept my eyes shut and let them talk, hearing my name a few times but wasn't with it enough to understand anything. When I woke up again, Chaz stood across the room, glaring out the window. His hands were on his hips, and he was hanging his head. He looked tired, so tired and beat down. Chaz? As he turned around and smiled, the bags under his eyes were evident. As was the fear in his eyes that maybe I wasn't going to wake up. Hey, how you feeling? Like shit, I said, smiling until it hurt too much. How bad do I look? You want me to be honest or lie? He asked as he sat on the edge of the bed. Honest. You look like shit too, he said with a smile that didn't last long. You took quite a beating. And Agnes said there was a massive drain on your power, but it'll come back once you've had time to rest. He glanced away as if he suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry. For what? I asked, confused. Chaz. You didn't do this to me. No, but I turned my back for a second and then you were gone. I'm supposed to look out for you, and I failed you. Look at me, I whispered, holding his cheek in my hand until his gaze found mine. I'm here and I'm alive. You didn't fail me. In fact, you inadvertently helped me. I found my dad, brought him back. He is here, right? Yeah, he is, and he's just as hard to make rest as you are. He rubbed the back of his neck. What happened to you? What did they do? Talking about what I'd been through was the last thing I wanted, reliving it all, but there were things they all needed to know, especially Moran. But if I was going to talk about it, I was only going to do it once. Can you wait to hear until everyone's here? I finally asked. I don't think I can tell it twice. Yeah, sure. You want to do it now? The sooner the better, I muttered. How long have I been back? About 3 days. It's been rough, but I'm glad to see you're awake. Everyone will. Brogan and Bruni especially. He cleared his throat roughly, then growled as he stood. I caught his hand and pulled him back. What happened in the void, I said slowly. I do want to talk about that first. If you want to pretend it didn't happen. If it'd be easier. I grabbed the front of his shirt and dragged him down, kissing him. The same intense rush of heat surged through me the second our lips met, and I knew it wasn't a fluke or heat of the moment. Whatever this was between us was real. He held my face in his hands as he deepened the kiss until I winced, and he drew back. Sorry, he whispered. That's the answer I was hoping for. Thinking of that moment got me through quite a few rough days, I admitted. But Brogan, I guess I should talk to him. He knows. He what? I told him, after you were taken. Things got heated and he knows, but, he said quickly when I groaned, falling back to the pillows, he's all right with it actually. He is? Yeah, he said he sensed it wasn't going to make it too much further between you two. What happened to us all changed him. Changed you too. But if you want to talk to him first before everyone else gets here, I'll send him your way. Considering all the other shit going on, dealing with relationship drama was the last thing I should have been thinking about, but we were a team, and if we weren't functioning well, we'd get killed whenever the cleansers decided to make their next move. I had to clear the air with Brogan, see that we were really going to be okay. I nodded, and Chaz kissed my forehead, then said he'd send Brogan and round up everyone else. And Dad, if he's awake, I added. He and I have a lot to talk about still. Bet you do. Then he said he'd take as long as he could to get everyone else here, then left. I waited until he was gone, then attempted to get up. It took a few tries, a lot of cursing, and falling back until I got enough strength to make it to my feet. Standing wasn't terrible, so I took a step, then another, and nearly made it to the window when my knees buckled, and a wave of dizziness sent me to the floor. I smacked my hands on the tiles. Damn it. Rori? What are you doing? Trying to hurt yourself even more? Brogan scolded as he rushed into the room and knelt at my side. No, just wanted to walk around, take in the view, you know. This is the VIP treatment right now, I teased. He grinned with me. Only the best for the crazy Griffiths. We are crazy. I sniffed hard and then hugged him. He held me right back, and it no longer seemed like we were dating, but like I was hugging my best friend. He rubbed my back as he sighed. Are you done scaring the daylights out of us all now? He asked. Pretty sure if you were going to be gone any longer, Chaz was going to lose his shit for good. He looked pretty rough. We sat on the floor smiling, but then I stopped. Brogan? He reached up and pulled my hands away from my braid like he always used to. I hadn't even realized I'd been doing it. You don't have to say anything. Really. I understand, and after decking Chaz once or twice, I accepted the truth. You and I work better like this. Friends. I agreed, not surprised to hear they'd gotten in a fight, but part of me still felt guilty, until he told me to not feel that way for following my heart, especially after all the shit we'd been going through. He helped me back to my feet, and we strolled around the room, holding me up as he talked about what I missed while I'd been gone. When he told me about the enemy's building they cleared out, I stopped and looked at him in disbelief. How many more are out there? Not sure yet, but we'll find them all. We'll save everyone they've taken, including the magic users under their control. Yeah, I might have some news about that, I muttered. And Bruni? She's working out even better than I expected, he said, cheeks reddening. Is that so? I asked, grinning wider. You know she is a damned good fighter, at least from what I managed to see before being taken. She is. Damned good. Great instincts. Wields that staff like a pro. Was trained by Agnes, he told me proudly. Yeah, she's a natural. Pretty too. She is, he agreed quietly, then threw me a look. Seriously? What? I might be wounded, but I'm not blind or deaf. It could be good. Or it could be nothing, he argued as voices came closer to my room. We should get you back in bed, and comfortable. He hesitated, then leaned in and whispered, You sure you're up for this? Trevor woke up first, told us of what he'd been through, and Rori, if you think you can't get through it if you don't want to, we'll understand. Flashes of those first few days in that cage came back to me. I dug my nails into Brogan's arm until he winced. Sorry? It's all right. I get it. I nodded, and he helped me back into bed. I got this, as long as I only have to talk about it once. He didn't seem too sure about that, but didn't argue with me. He took his place near the windows. Agnes walked in next, checking on me and asking how I felt. Blade and the other commanders after her, followed by Bruni. The next two to enter were Chaz, who was supporting Dad. He smiled at me and squeezed my hand as Brogan brought over a chair so he could sit by me. Chaz stayed close by too as the room fell silent. Moran was the last one in, shutting the door quietly behind him. Rori, glad to see you awake, he said and smiled warmly. How are you feeling? Like I was tortured for the last few weeks, I muttered with a bitter smile, but I'll live and that's what matters, right? His sudden frown said he did not agree. What happened after the fight? Dad kept hold of my hand and gave me an encouraging nod. Right here, kiddo. I wondered how much he'd told Moran already. From the haunted look in his eyes, I'd say most of it, if not all. Guess I'll start at the beginning. I don't remember being snatched, I said quietly, but when I woke up I was in a cage, trapped, hooked up to some wires and shit. Chaz snarled, shifting closer to my side. I took a deep breath, then told them everything that happened. I started talking. Every moment I spent with Tabitha, each time she had me beaten up or shocked, everything. Chaz grew angrier by the second, but I couldn't get myself to stop. I went on and on, telling them everything I could about the facility. How many guards I saw in rotation. Jake, I had to tell them about him and the other magic users with the object embedded in their necks. A chip of some kind that shocked them, could control them. That pissed off everyone. And then even more, when I got to the part about finally meeting Dad and how messed up he'd been. It gets worse, I said after what had to be 10 straight minutes of talking. Maybe longer. How could it get worse? Chaz growled, sounding barely in control of himself. Tabitha was planning on using us, Dad chimed in for me, when I wasn't able to get the words out. She was going to have us destroy our own, every last one, with necromancy. And then kill us in the end. It was a plan she talked about often, but my mind was too clouded to hear it clearly or understand what she was making me do. Moran approached Dad and held out his hand. Do not feel guilty for what these psychopaths have cooked up. You endured. Now you're here. Yes, but you and I both have talked about this. We're corrupted now. We are? I asked, alarmed. Chaz cursed. Agnes nodded. I was dumbfounded. What? Why didn't you say anything? We can't be here. We'll hurt someone. We think we found a way to clear you of all their influence, Agnes assured me quickly. We've been preparing it since you two were brought back. It should be ready by tomorrow. Once you are both rid of it, your powers should come back strong as ever. You'll feel like yourselves again. Dad shook Moran's hand. Thank you, my friend. Chaz? Yes, sir? Dad winked at me, then gave Chaz a smile. Drop the sirs, kid, and thank you for taking care of my daughter. All of you. Chaz shook Dad's hand next. She hasn't made it easy on us. Dad smiled as I rolled my eyes. I'm sure she hasn't. Do we know why Tabitha's doing all this at least? Bruni asked. Why do they hate us? I held up my hand. Actually, that's something else we need to talk about. Moran? Once I had his full attention, I relayed to him what Tabitha vented to me, about her family and what happened afterward. His eyes darkened, and a storm appeared in the depths of his pupils. Afterward, he said nothing for a long, drawn-out minute. Is it true? I finally demanded. Do we do that? Let magic users get away with murdering people? I don't know, he replied quietly. The incident when her children were killed. I remember it. What? I snapped at the same time Dad did. I was there, and we had the man in our custody. Said he was sent off to be locked away for life, his powers bound, but now if what she's saying is actually true. He rubbed his forehead. There have been rumors over the years of magic criminals escaping justice one way or another. They simply disappear into a black hole. I don't even know what happens to them. But you're a commander, I argued. But not the Prime Minister, for our magical community. He's the one who has full control. Not me. You know that. I believed I was privy to everything, but it would appear I was wrong. Still doesn't give her a right to declare all-out war, Bruni muttered. Why didn't she go to the authorities? Or ask for a real change instead of sending fanatics and killing us all off? She didn't trust anyone after that, I whispered. Sadly, can't say I blame her. Oh, and one more thing, I said, knowing what I was going to say was only going to make matters worse. I tried to kill Tabitha on the way out, but magic doesn't work on her. Beg pardon? Moran snapped. She's right, Dad said. Rori should have been able to drain her of life, but it did nothing. How is that possible? Brogan asked, the same annoyance on his face that I probably had on mine when I realized it. We'd asked that question too many damn times where the Bogards were concerned. They have magic users at their disposal, Dad mused. Had them for years. For all we know, they forced someone to create a magical deterrent against all our abilities. We'll have to kill them the old-fashioned way. Get close. Or a shot to the head. That always works well. Moran seemed to be calculating something in his head, then muttered to himself roughly when he came to a conclusion. I want none of you to worry about this issue. Not right now, Moran ordered. Tomorrow, will everything be ready? Agnes nodded. I will ensure they are. Good, then I want everyone out. Let Rori and Trevor rest. I will see to this other important matter. Blade? Take everything Rori and Trevor have told us of the headquarters in Oregon. See if you can find any sign of blueprints, land, a building, something. We are going to start planning now. Blade nodded and took off out the door. Moran turned to Dad. Good then, Trevor. Shall I escort you back to your room? Dad hugged me, then said he'd see me tomorrow. When he drew back, his eyes flickered with his magic, but he clearly was still tired. I suddenly wanted to close my eyes and go back to sleep. I definitely sensed my powers were off. And though I talked to Merlin and the shadow inside my head, I hadn't really tried to use Frost or any other ability since we came back. Now that there was a chance of being corrupted, I definitely wasn't going to try. Chaz was at the door when I called him back. Mind staying for a bit? I asked. If you don't mind. Why would I mind? I shrugged, then scooted over so he could climb up beside me. Someone closed the door to my room and we were left alone. I rested my head against his shoulder, and he found my hand, holding it securely. His body hummed with tension. Telling the story had been hard enough. I was surprised he'd managed to listen to it all, without shifting into bear form and destroying something. I'm not sure I can sleep, I whispered. I'll be right here the whole time, he promised, kissing the top of my head. Not leaving your side again. I'm sorry I put you guys through this. Don't you dare apologize. Don't. We're going to find them, and we're going to ensure they can't torture anyone else again. Ever. I'll kill them for what they did to you, to your dad, to everyone left behind. He breathed out heavily through his nose. I saw cages at the house we cleared out, saw how broken all those people were. And it killed me, knowing what you were going through, and I wasn't there to protect you. I survived because of you and the others, I whispered, turning him to face me. You would have been proud of me. Why is that? He asked curiously. I might have borrowed your charm and used it against Tabitha. His lips thinned in disapproval. I'm sure she loved that. Eh? It was worth the extra hits now and again to watch her get all pissed and thrown off balance. He shook his head and moved his arm so he could hold me to his side. What am I going to do with you, huh? Help me end a war? I could use a bear by my side. Oh, and did you know? Dad's familiar is a polar bear. It's crazy. And huge. Between his bear and you, those cleansers will be running away in terror. Chaz? What's wrong? He'd paled and looked like he was having trouble breathing. Something else that happened while you were gone, meant to tell you but haven't found the time yet. And? I asked, worry gnawing at me. Just tell me what's wrong. The oath is affecting my power, he growled. I can't shift anymore. We're out of time, I muttered. He nodded. We'll fix this, Chaz, we'll make it right. We have to kill them, he reminded me. I have to kill them. His hold tightened, and I held him as much as he held me. Whatever ritual Agnes had planned, I prayed it worked. Dad and I had to get better, so we could end this war once and for all, and admit the truth to the rest of the world. Non-users weren't ready for magic to exist in their lives no matter what they said. It was too much. We were all going to have a hard truth to face soon enough. A very hard truth.
Chapter 9. Chaz. Agnes placed her hands over the surface of the water, and it glowed bright white, keeping a subtle glint to it when she pulled back. The waters are ready. Rori stood beside me, clinging to my arm. Last night had been rough. She'd woken up a few times screaming from nightmares, but I was able to soothe her back to sleep. Ice covered her this morning when she woke though, and the room was filled with shadows. I'd been weak from staying close to her so long, but refused to leave her side. If this didn't work, I wasn't sure what else we could do, but we needed her, the three of us. I needed her. Ready? I asked as we stepped closer to the small pool, in what had been the meditation room here at the outpost. Not sure I can stand on my own yet. I'll go in with you, I assured her. You've got this. Brogan stepped forward and held her up as I slipped into the pool, clothes and all, not giving a damn. I turned around once in the water, and together, we got her lowered to the edge, and she slipped in after me. She sighed at the warmth of the water, and taking her hands, I pulled her toward the center, water sloshing around us both. Nothing's happening, she whispered, sounding on the verge of panicking. You have to go under. We'll do it together. Just keep your eyes on me. Rori, everything's going to be fine. She nodded, those light blue eyes finding mine. I gave her an encouraging smile. Ready? Take a breath. I sucked in a deep breath as she did the same, then together, we disappeared below the surface of the water. Agnes had explained what would happen to Rori if the cleansing ritual worked the way it was supposed to, seeing as it had never been done before. Majority of the corrupted ones did not have a team. A connection that would be able to pull them back to themselves, but Rori did. And seeing as how Brogan and I were related to the members on Trevor's team, the hope was it would work for him in the same way. I waited for the golden light of healing to surround Rori, but instead, the water suddenly darkened around us. It was like we'd slipped into some strange void. The surface of the water disappeared, and Rori's hand squeezed mine hard enough to hurt. Her hair floated around her face. She jerked as if in pain. Shadows lashed out from her body, then surrounded her. Her mouth opened in a scream, the water muffling the noise as she thrashed, but I held on. Just when I was worried the ritual failed, a bright burst of blue and violet light exploded from the darkness and joined with the gold. The three colors twisted around her, pressing against every inch of her body as she grew still. Too still. I gathered her up in my arms and pushed off the bottom of the pool, breaking the surface, shook out my hair and moved to the side of the pool. She's not breathing. I laid her out then climbed out after, checking for a pulse. When there wasn't one, I started compressions. Brogan was at her head, checking her pulse every few seconds. Come on, Rori. Come on. Bruni and Agnes were there, reaching out with healing touches. Rori coughed and sputtered, shooting upright. She gasped, clinging to me, and I held her, as did Brogan, keeping her safe between us. Did it work? She asked roughly. Well? How do you feel? Agnes asked her. Rori blinked a few times, her eyes clear. She appeared back to her old self, and when she grinned, then burst out laughing, I sighed. It worked. Feel 100 times better. What did you do? Threw everything I had into that water, Agnes explained. And then some from Bruni, Brogan, and Moran. And even from a certain druid I know, she added with a wink. Now then, let's get your father down here so we can have you both back in one piece. Brogan and I helped Rori to her feet. She held out her hands in front of her, snapped her fingers, and her staff appeared. I'm back. Next, we put Trevor into the water. Agnes went in with him, as he was also too weak to stand on his own. When he emerged, it took a while longer for him to come out of it. Rori clutched at mine and Brogan's hands, whispering under her breath for it to work. Finally he coughed and sputtered, shaking out his head and limbs. His eyes flared with familiar power. When he hugged Rori, a rush of power washed over all of us. The cleansers would never stand a chance. We found them, Blade announced as soon as we were all seated in the war room. What, where? Rori asked. Blade pointed to a place on the map. Northeast Oregon. There's a compound here owned by a company that traces back to the Bogards. As does the land it stand on. Had to go through a ton of shit to figure it out, but with what you told us, there's only one building that matches your description. Stuck in the middle of a fenced-in compound. A distance from where we found you. They're here. We have to go to them, I said. We need a plan, Agnes argued. And planning takes time. Chaz is right, Moran said, and Agnes frowned. He is. We are unfortunately running out of time. I received word from our dear Prime Minister this morning. The government is tired of cleaning up after us. They say if we can't find a resolution within 72 hours, they'll move in and deal with it their way. Meaning we'll all wind up in a cell somewhere most likely, and the cleansers might possibly get away. We have to move quickly. They're going to know we're coming, Rori said. What if they're not there? Then we get there as quickly as we can and find out if we have to go on a hunt or not, Moran said. We have no other choice at this point. I had to agree. My head gave another intense throb, and I rubbed at my brow furiously, willing it to go away. Brogan shot me a worried look from across the table, but I shook my head subtly. He didn't look happy about it, but he kept his mouth shut. Moran and Agnes had enough on their plates now that we were finally making what would hopefully be our final move. I was not going to add any more worries. Blade, I want you to gather the men, prepare them for. An explosion shook the building. Sirens wailed outside. All of us were on our feet, and at the windows, just in time to see the barricade that surrounded the area shimmering. It was being attacked from the outside. Damn it. Moran snapped, then shouted for us to get to our stations. The cleansers had come to us. This was it. Rori, Brogan, Bruni, and I all looked at each other long and hard, knowing what we had to do. If we were going to end the war, there was no turning back. We had to kill the Bogards and anyone else who got in our way. Briefly, we talked about a way to shock any magic users, destroy the chips in their necks so they would be back on our side. We had no way to test it, but it was the only plan we had. There was nothing left to say. Rory's dad was staring at her, seeming to be torn between worry and pride. He hugged her close, then rushed after Blade, ready to help lead our men into the battle. The four of us had to break the line. We had to save everyone. The building shook again. I rolled my shoulders, readying myself for the fight. The second that barricade fell, it would be chaos. And magic wouldn't work on Tabitha or Simon. Rori and Bruni summoned their staves, but Brogan and I had to return to our rooms to grab my sword and his daggers. Once we got to the Bogards, it would be hand to hand. Everyone else would be busy fighting off the main assault, giving us the chance we needed to take out the leaders. The outpost was filled with the vanguard, all sprinting to get either outside or up to the roof. Others were leading the injured to the safest place we had in this place, the armory. We passed Macy. She studied us, concern on her face. I gave her a firm nod, hoping she'd stay strong. Hoping I'd stay strong and survive this fight. Rori and Bruni waited for us just outside, staring at the barricade. With each attack, I waited for it to crack and the cleansers to flood inside. Moran was calling out orders as our units took positions, working in groups of shamans and druids. All the priests remained near the back, making ready to keep as many of our people alive as they could. Sadly, we relied so much on our powers we were limited on what firepower we had, so only a few held rifles and pistols. This fight was going to be bloody, there was no way around it. It was too late to leave, too late to do anything but wait. Rori stood to my left, Merlin ready and waiting beside her. Trevor was alongside Blade and the other commanders, a polar bear growling and pawing at the ground. The bear turned, and I caught the undead side of his face just like Merlin. I grabbed Rory's hand, squeezing it tightly. The barricade shuddered violently with another massive explosion. A crack made us all jump, and we watched in silence as the power protecting the outpost shattered. The connection between the four of us flared to life. Across the courtyard, black-clad soldiers rushed in. Time seemed to slow as the first few grenades were thrown. They tumbled through the air, ready to land and take out our people, but then time suddenly sped up, and we were all charging forward. Within seconds, the battle was chaos. It was all I could do to keep my eyes on Rori this time, while Bruni and Brogan were to my right. My sword stayed sheathed at my back. I wouldn't need it, not just yet. Rori swept up an icy wind that Brogan charged with lightning as it shot across, taking down a line of soldiers. Bruni stayed behind us, keeping up defensive attacks and giving us her healing light to bolster our attacks. I might not have been able to shift into bear form, but had some other tricks up my sleeve. I slammed my hands to the cold ground. Moss and vines erupted. Brogan held one hand to the sky, dragging more lightning from the heavens, supercharging the moss and vines, causing them to wrap around enemy limbs. They jerked and yelled at the electricity flooding their bodies. But there was no time to gloat. More and more grenades were thrown. Magic user after magic user hit the ground in a heap, unable to use their powers. They were pulled off the ground in droves, taken back to the safety of the outpost. It wouldn't stay safe for long if we couldn't find a way to stem the tide of the enemy rushing in. A roar caught my attention, and I turned in time to see the polar bear barreling into a line of soldiers, his jaws clamping down on any limb that got in his way. Trevor was behind him, wielding his staff, eyes violet with dark power. Frost and ice swarmed around him while shadows leached from wherever he stepped, seeking out targets. Watching Rory's power had been impressive, but her dad's power was insane. I'd wondered why he'd been considered the best on my parents' team. Now I knew why. "Chaz!" Brogan yelled. "They're here." I spotted the group moving inside the crack now. It was the former elite guards, now converted into enemies by the devices in their necks. Behind them were the bowguards. Those bastards. They were using our elite guard fighters as their personal bodyguards. "We have to try to turn them," I yelled. "You ready for this?" "Don't have a choice." As we stood there, several druids charged the now-turned enemy elite guards, but were immediately thrown back as the enemy elites moved as one, using their amped-up power against their own kind. It was sickening to witness. The enemy elites marched in closer, the bowguards directly behind them. There was no other choice. If this plan failed, we would have to resort to harsher means. I looked at Rori. She looked back at me, her gaze determined. She frowned but nodded firmly. The final attack would fall on her, taking their lives, ending them to end the war. Knowing my power was weakening the longer this fight lasted, we moved fast. But we'd never have a chance if the enemy elites saw us coming. Rori had told us about the trick she'd used when she had to cover her talking to Trevor. It was the best we could hope for, in way of distraction. The four of us rushed forward until we were about 20 yards away from the elites, then fell in line behind Rori. Holding her staff over her head, she bellowed, then slammed it into the cold ground. Ice shot out in a storm surrounding, hiding us from view, as shadows weaved in and out, concealing our actions. Tabitha was screaming at someone to get through the wall of ice, but the storm was too strong now that Rori had the three of us backing her up. Rori spread her arms wide, and the storm shifted, spreading out further and further in each direction. "Do it now," she yelled, her eyes glowing fiercely. Brogan and I faced each other. He rolled his hands over each other. A totem appeared between us, one of healing and strength. Then he raised one hand over his head as lightning crackled along his fingertips and up his arm, then down into the totem. When it was charged with his energy, I closed my eyes and focused on the 7 targets surrounding the bowguards. 7 elites we needed to free of the chip in their neck. Life-giving nature slipped from my fingers into the totem. We only had one shot at this. One shot only. I opened my eyes and looked at Brogan. He gave me a nod. Together we aimed the pure force of nature toward Rori's ice wall. She dropped it just in time to let our magic through. It shot through the air, crackling and glowing a brilliant green light as it struck each of the elites. "What is that?" "Stop them," Tabitha screamed. The elites moved as one to attack, but the power struck the mage dead center, and she froze, hands hanging in midair as the lightning-filled moss and vines wrapped around her limbs and climbed. More tendrils exploded to the right and left of her, catching every single elite up in a net of lightning and vines. They screamed, grabbing for the greenery. Bruni stepped forward and raised her staff over the totem. A warm golden light illuminated the vines and moss, joining the rest of our power as it encompassed the elites. "Stop them! Target them, you idiots!" Tabitha yelled. Rori had us covered. She twisted her hand, and the ice storm intensified, throwing the soldiers back in a heap. When a few managed to stay upright and raise their guns, she twisted her staff, and the storm turned from icy to shadowy as tendrils thrust outward, draining each soldier. Bullets hit the ground near our feet. I staggered backward, fearing I was going to lose control of the power we'd created, but then Trevor was there, riding atop his polar bear like a damned wild man, his staff raised over his head as he charged down the line of soldiers. The elites all fell to their knees, and just when I believed it hadn't worked, the magic ricocheted, throwing us all off our feet. The totem disappeared into dust.
All 7 enemy elites were standing slowly back up, tearing the moss from around their necks. They glanced around looking lost and angry. I held my breath, waiting for them to turn on us and attack. The mage lifted her hand and whirled around. Fire burst to life in her palms. A pop rang out and she staggered backward, blood pooling. 2 more shots were fired. Tabitha and Simon had drawn their guns and opened fire. One by one they fell. Rori. She swung her staff, and a wall of ice rose up, separating the bogards from the former enemy elites. Some lay on the ground hurt, some dead. Bruni and another priest rushed in to drag them out of harm's way, as more soldiers rushed in through the crack in the barricade. I hurried to join Bruni, but using so much power had weakened me, and I sensed my connection to nature would be cut off almost completely shortly. Soon I'd be down to hand. Chaz. They're running. Brogan shouted. Tabitha and Simon were rushing away from the outpost. We can't let them escape. I had to kill them, or I'd lose my power for good. I glanced at Rori, who was shielding Bruni and the injured elites, and waved my arm over my head at her. She caught sight of me and made to join us, but gunfire erupted, and bullets sprayed the ground around them. Her and Bruni jumped to action to shield those around them. Go. Rori bellowed. We'll find you, just don't let them escape. The sword at my back was now my only weapon, but it would have to do. Brogan drew his daggers. I led the charge out of the barricade. We slashed our way through more oncoming soldiers. Some were taking a page from their leaders' books, and running away as fast as they could in the opposite direction. Up ahead, Tabitha ducked behind a tree, Simon behind her. No way in hell were they getting away from me now.
Chapter 10. Brogan. All those days of training with my daggers, wondering if I'd ever actually put them to use, rushed back to me now as I chased after Simon and Tabitha. The very same assholes who started all of this. The ones we could not let disappear into the wilderness. Chaz was probably drained of his power by now. Or just about. If we let them go, the oath might end up taking his life before long. That could not happen. Not now when we were so close. The bogards made a mistake, thinking they could attack us at our house and win. We were stronger, so much stronger than they ever anticipated, and that was going to be their downfall. Chaz knew the woods around this outpost better than anyone, so he took the lead, easily ducking and dodging around trees and underbrush. Rocks slipped under my feet, but I stayed upright as we slid down a hill, then kept on running, sprinting as fast as we could to catch up. But then Chaz ducked suddenly to the right, and I stayed on his heels, not sure what he had planned, only trusting he knew where he was going. The path we were on turned into an incline, and soon we were looking down through the trees. And atop our targets. They were moving fast. A few miles ahead was a road, most likely where they had their getaway vehicle. I could take those out if I had to, but even I was weaker after using so much magic to free the elites from the chips in their necks. Chaz threw a glance at me over his shoulder and winked, then suddenly leaped off the hill and through the air. I cursed but didn't slow down. I pushed off the ledge. Gripping my daggers hard, I braced for impact as Chaz collided with Simon, taking him down. I landed behind Tabitha and managed to roll into her legs, so she went down too. Leaves and dirt scattered as Chaz and Simon scrambled to get control of Simon's pistol. I flipped my daggers back around and aimed them at Tabitha, whose pistol still holstered at her side. You really thought you were just going to run away, huh? I muttered. Get up. She snarled at me, spitting at my feet. You're all evil. That's what you are. A plague on our world. If it's the last thing I do, I will destroy you all. Not if you're rotting away. I planned to hold her until Chaz could have his chance to end her. I considered finding a way to capture her instead and bring her in, but what was the point? If either of them lived, there was always a chance this would happen again. All it would take was her talking to another crazed fanatic, and we'd be dealing with a new war 5 years from now. No, it all had to end. Today. I took a step toward her when bullets struck the ground at my feet. Diving to the side, I yelled a warning to Chaz, and he was forced to abandon his hold on Simon. We dove behind trees as bullets cracked all around us, trapping us. Any ideas? I shouted, ducking when a bullet hit too close for comfort, sending bark flying into my face. Chaz. I have no power left, he growled. I carefully poked my head around the tree. 3 rifle-carrying soldiers stood on the ridge we'd jumped from. I was weak, but all I needed was one good blast, and we'd be able to pick up where we left off. "Whatever you're going to do it fast," Chaz snapped. "They're running again." Every fiber of my being said this was a terrible idea, but I had no other choice. I sheathed my daggers and flexed my hands at my sides. I shot a bolt of lightning over him to the other side, kicking up a pile of leaves. Gunfire hit it instantly. I threw myself to the other side, aiming my hands at the men on the ridge. Lightning bolts shot from my palms, shattering the rocks beneath the men. They yelled as the ledge gave way, then collapsed, taking the 3 of them down. The ground rushed up to meet me. I landed with a grunt, pain exploding through my right shoulder, but I'd live. Chaz was there, hauling me to my feet. "Crazy bastard, have you lost it completely?" "What? It worked, didn't it?" I pointed. "We should get them now." I reached for my daggers. He snarled in agreement, and once again we sprinted through the trees. The men I'd taken down were getting back up, but all we needed was time. Chaz drew his sword as Tabitha came into sight again. There was no sign of Simon. She stopped short and jumped to the right. Chaz threw out his arm in warning, but too late. The grenade fell in front of us, and the electric jolt sent us both to our knees, cutting off my connection to my power. Back arching, the world spun around me as I gritted my teeth, daggers falling from my numb hands. Chaz pushed through it as Simon stepped out from behind a nearby tree. He grabbed hold of my hand, and a surge of strength, one that came not from our individual powers, but from a much stronger source, our connection, rushed through me. Currents continued to wash over us, but we were now able to get to our knees, then back on our feet, cringing and cursing against the onslaught of pain. Tabitha's smirk fell away. She reached for her pistol, but I was faster. I threw a dagger at her. Eyes wide, she dropped to the side, but it caught her shoulder. She fell backward, reaching up for it as Chaz went after Simon. His sword easily swatted away the pistol the man had raised, but the madman was not helpless without it. I wanted to watch them fight, but Tabitha had yanked my dagger free from her shoulder and tossed it aside. She went for her pistol again. I kicked it out of her hand before she could raise it, then another kick to her chest sent her into a tree. She screamed from the impact, but I wasn't even close to being finished with her. My fist met her face. Blood spurted from her nose. I grinned, thinking of all the pain she'd put Rori through, and knowing I was going to at least be able to cause some in return. Then a sharp jolt hit my side, and I went rigid from the taser she'd plunged into my ribcage. The other dagger fell from my hand, and she decked me harder than I expected. The taser disappeared from my side. Then she pressed it into my neck, with the voltage amped up. "Fascinating how you are brought down by something as simple as electricity," she snapped, jabbing me again in the collarbone. "So simple, so pure." I reached up, attempting to grab the taser, but she kicked me in the knee and I sank to the ground. Somewhere behind me, Chaz was yelling, and then there was the sickening sound of someone gasping for air. Tabitha's head jerked up, and it was my chance to push away from her. Limbs weak and limp from the taser, I scrambled away the best I could, just to get out of range of that damned thing. "Simon!" she yelled, but there was no answer, just another pained groan, then the sound of a body collapsing. "Simon, answer me." "Yeah, don't think he can do that," Chaz replied. I sighed as Chaz came into view, holding his bloody sword. Someone was dead then. One down. One to go. "You bastard," she shrieked at Chaz. "You killed him." "I did. Now it's your turn." He stalked toward her. I pushed to my feet. Leaves and sticks rustled all around us, but if it was friend or foe coming, there was no way to tell. Until I saw the soldier raising his gun. Yelling a warning to Chaz, I rushed the man, grabbed hold of the gun, and aimed it upward as he pulled the trigger. Shots rang out, deafening me as we fought to control the weapon. Everything happened in slow motion. I decked the soldier, knocking him down, then tossed the gun away. Chaz grunted in pain. Tabitha screamed and gasped. I turned around, expecting to see her run through and on the ground dead. Chaz shouted. Tabitha smirked. It was like something slammed into my chest. I stumbled backward, unsure of what just happened, when a weird cold bloomed on the left side of my body. I blinked, wondering why all sound was muffled and my vision was blurry. I shook my head, wanting to clear away the fog, but that only seemed to make it worse. Brogan. I opened my mouth to reply, but no sound came out, and then I was falling backward. I raised my head a little, as much as I could. Chaz was sprinting toward me. Tabitha lay on the ground. Chaz had a gun. A smaller one. Where had that come from? Shit. Hold on, he barked, pressing his hands to my chest, his face pale. I wanted to ask him what was wrong when agony flooded me. I cringed. What? She shot you, he muttered, pressing even harder. His hands were glowing a calming green color. Moss spread out over my chest, covering the wound and helping to stop the blood flow. I raised my hand, attempting to call up a totem, but all the strength had fled my body. You did it, I whispered to him with a smile. You got your power, they're dead. Yeah. And you're going to make it, you bastard. You hear me? You don't get to die right now. My amusement turned into a grimace, and the cold spread. Damn, never thought I'd go out from a gunshot wound. Huh. Brogan. Open your eyes, you moron. Chaz snapped. You're not dying on me. Chaz. Brogan. Rori screamed. Where are you? Here. We're here. Brogan's hurt. Chaz bellowed. I blinked, and suddenly Rori and Bruni were there. Rori was holding my hand, and Bruni was leaning over me, saying something. Her lips moved, pretty lips full. Bet they were soft, too. I grinned sadly, wishing I had more time. But the cold grew stronger, and the urge to fall asleep had me closing my eyes again, even as Bruni's hands glowed golden with her healing power. No. Brogan, look at me, Bruni ordered. Don't you dare close your eyes. It's fine, I mumbled, barely able to speak anymore. My hand somehow managed to reach up and cup Bruni's cheek. Tears shimmered in her eyes, and she pressed her hands to my wound even harder, but the damage had been done. No, you have to stay here. You can't leave, not now, she snapped as my hand slipped from her cheek. Brogan. My eyes closed, and I drifted, not sure what was going to happen next, but whatever it was, I'd face it with a smile. As my body grew lighter, the sounds of the others fell away. I no longer heard Rori crying and cursing, or Chaz growling my name. There was only peaceful bliss. And a glowing light. I frowned, wondering if this was the light everyone always talked about. A figure appeared out of the light, and I found myself staring into the golden eyes of Bruni. You're not finished just yet, she said. Come back, Brogan. Part of me wanted to argue, but another part was tempted, and my eyes fluttered open as the world slammed into sharp reality around me. I blinked once, twice, wondering why I was so warm, when I realized Bruni's lips were pressed to mine. Her tears fell over my face as she whispered against my mouth, begging me to let myself be healed. My hand jerked, and then the pain rushed back all at once. I gasped and she flinched. Her healing glow, coming to life all over again as Chaz and Rori assisted her. The pain grew unbearable, and I sensed I was about to pass out, but Bruni ran her hand through my hair, smiling. He'll live, she told Rori and Chaz. We need to get him back. And nothing after that mattered. Darkness closed in again, and I slept. I gasped, sitting upright, finding myself in my room. Bandaging covered my chest, and a blanket was draped over the rest of me. Sitting up was too painful, so I lay there, replaying what all I remembered. I'd been in the woods with Chaz, chasing after Tabitha and Simon. There'd been a fight. Good, you're awake, Rori said. I glanced up. She and Chaz entered. She hugged me carefully. Chaz patted me on the shoulder. Look like shit. I stared at her long and hard, then laughed, but that hurt too much, so I settled for a smile. What the hell happened out there? And why do you two look like you've been rolling around in the mud? The ground had been frozen when the fight started at the outpost, but they were definitely covered in mud from their boots to their hair. Guys? Did I miss something? You were shot and nearly killed. You're allowed. Chaz's voice was rough. Shot. I picked at the bandages carefully, straining to recall, and finally, an image of Tabitha holding a gun came back to me. That witch. Don't worry, she's dead, Chaz assured me. They both are. What about the rest of their men? The army, the other prisoners? All taken care of. While you were playing Sleeping Beauty, we went to the main headquarters and cleared it out, Rori explained. Hence the mud. Not all of them wanted to go willingly at first, but we're making headway. We won the war. Lost a lot of lives. Too many. But it's over. Officially over. Falling back into the pillows, I felt relief wash over me. I closed my eyes. The hatred that lived in Tabitha and Simon had killed so many. Now they were dead, and the hard part would begin. Picking up the pieces of the mess they left behind. Knock knock. Bruni. Another memory tugged at me, and then I remembered. I'd been near death when she kissed me. She brought me back. I smiled at her, wishing she would come in closer, but she stayed in the doorway looking uncertain. He's going to live? She asked with a teasing smile, but the raw emotion in her eyes said she was more worried than she was letting on. He will, sadly, Chaz said with a wink. Be back up and causing mischief in no time. Good. That's good. Rori. Your dad was looking for you. Right. See you later. Rori kissed my forehead, then bounded out of my room. I frowned when Bruni left with her. Damn. You want me to call her back? Chaz asked. I shook my head. You sure? We all saw it. No. It's fine, I muttered. How about you fill me on everything else I missed? His annoyed grunt said that was not what he wanted to hear, but he pulled a chair closer and told me they'd officially turned over the Bogards' bodies. And all the prisoners. And the members of the cleansers. The government was content for the moment, but neither one of us wanted to talk about the war. So he told me about the families they'd managed to reunite already, and how relieved everyone was the fighting would be over for a while. Every now and then, I looked at the door, waiting for Bruni to come back. She never did. At some point, I figured I'd have to bring up the kiss we shared. Maybe. In the near future. For now, I would hold on to that moment to get me through.
Chapter 11. Chaz. Snow fell over what remained of the outpost, making what had been ugly and torn beautiful again. I tugged my long sleeves down as I took a break from moving debris to the side to make way for more trucks. After killing Tabitha and Simon in the woods and the fighting had ended here, we loaded up and headed to their main headquarters. Well, all of us except Brogan, who was passed out still from being shot. That moment replayed over and over again in my head, watching my blade pierce Tabitha. Feeling my powers coming back to me as my oath was fulfilled. Then seeing a gun appear in her hand. She'd aimed it at Brogan. The blood spilling over his chest. I hung my head, never wanting to witness that again. Thankfully, at the main headquarters, we met very little resistance from the guards, and after they were cleared out, we set about rounding up all our people. Rori found Jake and told him how we had found a way to remove the chip in their necks, freeing them of the tortuous lives they'd been living. Every single person was loaded and brought back here, until the other locations could be tracked down. There were families that needed to be reunited, a lot of families. Blade was leading one team, Agnes another. Moran told the four of us to stay here and rest. He hadn't wanted us to even go to headquarters, not with Brogan out of commission and the rest of us nursing wounds, but we had to see it through all the way to the bitter end. And that's where we were. Macy was inside somewhere, anxiously waiting with so many others to see if their families were alive. If they would be with each other again. So many had already found one another, but there were still so many more out there, waiting to be freed from their cages. It was going to be a long road to recovery, but we'd make it through. There was one family, in particular, I needed to help put back together because the two members here were dragging their feet. Every time I mentioned to Rori it'd be a good time to go home and see her mom, and have Trevor see Jody again, both of them continued to find an excuse to stay behind. Help with the refuges or help with the cleanup. I was going to put my foot down today. Hell, I was tempted to have Moran order them both off the base so they would finally get it over with. Rori was nervous for both her parents, but Trevor looked downright scared the last time I caught him and Rori talking about what Jody might do to him when he returned home. "You seem deep in thought," Brogan said as he approached. "Something on your mind?" "Nothing more than usual." I glanced over to see him holding his side. "How you feeling?" "Like I was blown up, electrocuted, shot, and then beat up some more. Bruni healed me up for the most part though. I'll be fine in a few days. Just sore right now. Could have been a lot worse." "Could have been," I agreed, knowing how close he'd been to leaving us for good. "Yeah." He studied the destruction around us. "We survived our first war. Think it'll be the last? With all the shit Moran dug up recently." "Who knows, man," I muttered. "I think our society is about to be torn apart, if he can tie it all back to the Prime Minister and his lackeys. We might be in for a long few years. You ready for it? It's our job, right? Elite guards. Starting to feel like I am one now." "Just now, huh?" I teased. Moran had dug into the situation more, since Rori told him Tabitha's story, and what he found was beyond insane. The cover-ups were just the start. There was corruption within our offices, the 4-point facilities, outposts everywhere. Before long, our entire magical community would know all about it, and it'd be a shit show. We'd be cleaning up messes left and right, which was why I had to convince Rori to take her dad home before he was called back to action and our team was on the move. Moran promised us 3 weeks of leave, but there was a chance we wouldn't even get that. "So," I said as the snow picked up and we moved back inside, "you talked to Bruni yet?" "Course I have, talked to her every day," he said, but avoided my eyes. "She kissed you, man. You can't ignore that forever." "Not ignoring it. Just figuring out what to say to her about it." "You like her, right?" "Yeah, I do. She sort of saved my life. Remember?" Then he frowned, shuffling his feet nervously and shoving his hands in his pockets. "But what if it was in the heat of the moment type of thing? I don't want to make it awkward." I shrugged. "Something tells me you'll be fine, as long as you talk to her about it." "I know you're right, but there's something else I want to do first." "You think Rori would be up to taking me into the void?" "It's not her you have to worry about. You heard Agnes. All of us are supposed to be on power lockdown so we can fully recover after putting ourselves through so much strain these last few weeks. That. Plus she and Moran had finally learned the truth about why I had killed Tabitha and Simon. I thought I'd endured the worst lectures possible from them both before. Man, had I been wrong. My ears were still ringing from Agnes ripping me a new one, and then Moran for doing exactly the same. I stretched out my hands, then rolled my neck. I'd wanted to shift for the last 2 days, but something told the second I did it, Agnes would appear out of nowhere and yell at me that I was risking getting hurt. Granted, the fight against Tabitha and Simon had been intense, but I sensed I was healed all the way. Agnes was over-worrying, not that I blamed her. We'd all nearly died, again. Eventually, she'd told me, her heart was going to give out from scaring her so much. "But she'll do it if you ask," I told Brogan. "Don't let Agnes see you, though." "Mind standing watch?" "Sure, why not? Gives me a chance to work on my speech, to convince Rori to finally leave this outpost." Part of me understood her worry about how her mom would react, but her parents were alive. Her mom would want to see Trevor again. And I wanted her to have the family I couldn't. It didn't take long to find Rori. She was talking with Bruni. They were giggling about something, and when they saw us coming, both clammed up. "What are you two doing?" I asked, raising my brow as I pulled her close for a quick kiss. "Nothing at all. But you two look like you're up to something. What's going on?" You think you could take me into the void? Brogan asked, his eyes darting to Bruni, then back to Rori. I was hoping to talk to Grayson, but don't want to push you if you're not up to it. I don't mind. Chaz, you keep watch with Bruni? Sure, as long you are really up for this. She kissed me again. I'll be fine. Like I keep telling Agnes, my powers are good, I'm good. Tired and bruised, but other than that, good to go. We can go to the temple room. Agnes is clear on the other side of the outpost, so hopefully, we've got some time. She held my hand as we walked through the outpost, laughing while we snuck through corridors and down steps, avoiding as many people as we could. Especially Agnes or Moran. It was like we were on some ridiculous stealth mission to get to the room, but we made it, and she walked inside. Brogan followed. I asked him to keep an eye on Rori. If it looks like it's too much, come back. I will. Don't worry, he promised, then joined Rori, sitting on the floor. I took my place in the doorway with Bruni, sensing Rory's power growing, then sensing the moment they slipped into the void. I glanced back once, but there was a peaceful look on Rory's face. Merlin had appeared, and was at rest beside her. He gave me a wolfish grin, then rested his head on her lap, watching over her. So, I said to Bruni as we leaned on opposite sides of the doorway, you talked to him yet? About what? You know what, I replied. God, you two are ridiculous, you know that? She frowned but then laughed. Rori was telling me the same damn thing. To talk to him, but... Damn, every time I think of doing it, I chicken out, which sucks because I am not a coward. No, you're not. I paused when I heard steps coming closer, but no one came down our corridor. He likes you. How do you know? Trust me, I know, I told her. Seems you both just need a push in the right direction. That's not exactly helpful advice. No? Then how about this? We almost died, and if nothing else, you should know life is too damned short, too dangerous in our line of work to hold anything back. And, I added, knowing how much I was going to sound like Agnes or Moran, but not caring because it was true. We're a team. If we're not open and honest with each other, we'll fall apart. That's the truth of it. Merlin stirred, and I turned around, but he just rolled over, his tongue lolling out the dead side of his mouth. I smirked, rolling my eyes at him, but Rory's face was calm, and Brogan wore a smile now. I assumed they found Grayson. You're right, Bruni sighed. He did ask me if I wanted to tag along with him to see his parents. Really? Yeah. I'm going to see my folks tomorrow. They live just a couple hours from here. He said he wouldn't mind the company since you and Rori would be going with Trevor, taking him home. Trapped in a car together for hours. Sounds like a perfect time to talk about it. Guess we'll find out. I was about to tell her again it would be fine when steps marched toward us, then came to a sudden halt. What the hell are you doing? Agnes snapped. I groaned. Bruni cringed. Is Rori doing what I think she is? She's fine, Agnes. You're worrying for nothing, I said, letting her see around me. Are they in the void? They are, but Merlin's with her and Brogan won't let her push herself, you know that. She crossed her arms, scowling at me. And if she does hurt herself? She won't. I trust her and so should you. Who said I trust you, young man? She said sharply. Bruni stifled a laugh. I rolled my eyes. But I do, just don't let her stay in there forever, all right? Moran is looking for the 4 of you. What for? Your 3 weeks has been cut down to 1, she informed us. Not by his choice. This mess he dug up is going to keep him occupied. The commanders too. So seeing as you 4 are the only complete and functioning team, he's sending you to look into an issue regarding several magic communities in Maine. What type of issue? Bruni asked. I'll let him tell you. Go and find him as soon as they return. She started to walk away, then stopped, turned back, and narrowed her gaze at Bruni. Did you talk to Brogan yet? Bruni groaned as I chuckled. Agnes winked, then walked away. Brogan seemed content an hour later, now that he and Rori emerged from the void. Whatever he had to talk to Grayson about seemed to go over well. I told them what Agnes said, and their smiles vanished, but at least we were still getting a week. We set off to find Moran and get the rundown from him about why we were needed in Maine. He slid files across the table to us. I opened one up to study the report, stopped, looked at him, then back at the file. Seriously? I asked. Afraid so. On top of all this other shit coming down, we have this to deal with. Have fun, be careful. That's it. Brogan shook his head as he flipped through pages. What did this? No idea. He breathed out. Well, I have a few ideas, but you four have proved you can handle being an elite team, and this is what comes with the territory. I'll be checking up, of course, but I leave this to you to figure out. And to take care of. We clear? You sure you don't want us to leave right away? Rori asked, and I stepped on her toe. What? Stop trying to avoid seeing your mom, I said, snapping the file closed. Says here the attacks only happen every 3 weeks, so we have some time. We are taking your father back home, and you and he are going to talk to your mom before we get ourselves into any other crazy situations. She huffed, crossing her arms. Moran nodded in agreement. Don't make me order you, Griffith. He's right, accept it, move on. I suggest all of you head out in the morning to take care of personal business. I'll send a few men up there now to keep an eye on the situation. See? All good, I told Rori, grinning widely at her as she continued to glare at me. Moran informed us he'd be traveling over the next month, but would do his best to keep in touch and let us know how the internal investigations were going. It seemed it was nothing he sounded pleased about. He waved at us all to get going. I followed Rori to her room so I could make sure she packed. She chucked clothes into her bag, muttering under her breath the whole time, until I finally went to her and wrapped her up in my arms. What are you really afraid of? I asked. You do want your dad to see your mom again, right? Mom has a bit of a temper, Rori said, cringing. The second she sees him, there might be things flying at his head. And I'm fairly certain he's going to be expecting that. He's a grown man. He can handle himself. He's right, Trevor's voice came from the doorway. His face was set, but his eyes flared briefly with power from his nerves. It's time I face your mom. Need to see her, tell her the truth, explain what happened. Rori went to him, taking his hand. We'll be there too, just in case it gets out of hand. He didn't seem too reassured by her words. She's going to hate me. No, she won't, Rori said. She loves you, never stopped no matter what crap she said about you after you left. Trevor frowned. I cringed. Not exactly the right thing to say, I whispered. Rori shrugged. What? It's true. Just being honest. Right then. We'll head out in the morning. Trevor looked like he wanted to say more, but ducked out of the room and went on his way. Tomorrow's going to suck. I shook my head at her words. You two are terrible. It'll be better than you think. Promise. Sure, right? Anything else you want to try and tell me before we head out? I started to say no, then stopped, realizing there was one big thing I had neglected to tell Rori. It had been years since anyone said the name aloud. Since Moran and Agnes had been keeping my identity a secret. I took Rori's hand as I said, my real last name isn't Bryce. It's not? What the hell is it then? Donahue, I told her, grinning as I said it. Chaz Donahue. Well then, Chaz Donahue, it's a pleasure to meet you, she said as she stood on her toes and kissed me. You ready for whatever comes next? I slid my arms around her and drew her in as close as I could. As long as you're there, I'm ready for anything.
Chapter 12. Rori. I was fighting to keep from hyperventilating. Rori, we have to get out of the car at some point. Chaz glanced at me from behind the steering wheel. I know, I told him. I'm just nervous is all. It'll be fine, Dad said from the back seat, reaching forward to take my hand. Besides, I'm the one who should be the most afraid here. You might not remember, but your mother does have a temper when she's extremely ticked off, and I think this qualifies. I blew out a heavy breath, giving Dad's hand a squeeze. Right. We just need to go in there and get this over with. Chaz got out of the car. Dad and I followed. And Dad had a point. Mom would be pissed at me for keeping her in the dark about how dangerous the last few weeks had been. Like almost dying and whatnot, but Dad was the one she thought had walked out on her. Just up and left her. Now, he was coming back to tell her he was alive and a necromancer hybrid. And that I was exactly the same. Wednesdays were Mom's day off, leaving the bakery in charge of her manager. That was good. The last thing I wanted was to create a scene in front of a bunch of strangers. Walking up to the small cottage was strange, but Chaz took my hand and kept me steady enough to reach the front door, then raise my hand to knock. I'd given her no warning I was coming, let alone bringing my new boyfriend or my long-lost father. I knocked a second time, worried she was out, but then I heard her calling that she was coming. I squeezed Chaz's hand so hard he winced and let up just as the front door unlocked and swung inward. "Rori?" she gasped, then wrapped her arms around me, drawing me into a tight embrace. "I've been calling, but your cell was disconnected. I couldn't get hold of you. Where have you been?" She leaned back, holding my face carefully in her hands, and frowned at the bruises and scrapes still covering my cheeks and hands from the fight. What happened?" "Your hair, there's white in it." "I'm fine, Mom," I assured her. "A lot happened. But the war is over." "I know, I've been watching the news non-stop. What is it?" she asked when tears streamed down my cheeks. Before long, she had some shimmering in her eyes too. "No matter. You're home now, and you can tell me all about it." "And I will, but first there's someone I want to introduce you to." I glanced backward and Chaz stepped inside with a soft smile. "Mom, this is Chaz Bryce." "Nice to meet you," Chaz said and held out his hand. Mom took it but then frowned at me. "Wait. Is this the guy you asked me about? If I recognize the name?" "It is," I told her, knowing now why even after learning Mom had known Chaz as a little kid, she wouldn't recognize the last name. "His real last name is Donahue." Mom's smile seemed frozen on her face. "No, but you and your parents." "I don't understand." She slowly took her hand back, brow furrowing. "Rori?" "My parents were killed when I was little," Chaz supplied. "It's why we stopped coming around." "I'm so sorry, but you're a magic user?" she asked. "I am. Just like my parents were." "Druid," he said, showing her the mark on the back of his hand. "No. Mel and Charlie never had magic." "They did," he corrected gently. "But they hid it from you to try and keep you and Rori safe since they weren't just magic users, but elite guardsmen." Mom took a step back, shaking her head. "No. Trevor met them at work. They all worked together at the marketing firm," she mumbled. Chaz and I hung our heads for a moment. "What's going on? Explain this to me now." "What are you saying?" "Mel and Charlie worked with Trevor, but not at a marketing firm," Chaz said. "Mom, there's someone else here you need to see," I told her and backed away toward the door. Dad stood off to the side out of sight, but when he saw me, he took a deep breath, squared his shoulders for whatever Jody Griffith might do, and stepped inside, facing down the love of his life. "Jody," he said, voice strained just with that one word. Mom shook her head furiously, backing away from him. "No. You left us. You just left us. Your hair, why is it white?" "What? I don't understand." Her face paled, and she staggered backward, looking ready to pass out. Dad reached out and caught her hand, drawing her into his arms. "Easy, love. Easy," he whispered and guided her to the couch, sitting her down. He knelt in front of her, holding her hands, but she took them back. Hurt and confusion warred on her face. "I know I have a lot to explain, but I want you to know, I never wanted to leave you." "Then why did you?" she snapped. "Why? It was my job. I'm a necromancer and a frost mage," he told her, revealing his hands. "What?" She ran her fingers over them. "I've never seen these before." "I hid them from you," he admitted. "When we met, I had just become a member of the elite guard. I knew how dangerous my life would be, and you told me you weren't used to magic. I wanted to keep you safe, so I lied. He held out his hands as she tentatively touched the markings. I'm so sorry. So sorry. His voice was filled with pain and regret. I should have just told you the truth up front. And your hair? Carefully, she ran her fingers through his much longer hair. Happens when you're a necromancer, he told her. That's why Rory's has some white in it now. I held my breath, thinking Mom had gotten over it all. Then she pushed up from the couch, furious all over again. You walked out on me. On Rori. I went on a mission to try and find and stop the bastards who started this war, before it even started, he argued. I went and I was taken captive, held in a cage, tortured, broken. His voice cracked on that last word. I started to go to him, but he held up his hand, stopping me. Our daughter reminded me of who I am, and got me out. Our daughter brought me back to you, so I could tell you the truth. I apologize. Jody, please. I can't say enough how sorry I am, but I love you, never stopped loving you. I tried for so long to get back to you both. I did. But each time I failed. The only thing that kept me going for so long was the thought of you. Mom was crying now, her arms crossed over her chest as if that would protect her from a whirlwind of emotions. I love you, he repeated. But I'll understand if this is too much. If you want me to go. Dad took a step toward the door, though his face was begging her to say something. Mom said nothing. He sighed and turned. Rori, I'll see you again soon. Dad, wait, I tried. He shook his head and kept on walking. He was at the door when Mom whispered his name. She bolted across the room, and he turned in time to catch her in his arms as she kissed him. He wrapped her up in a hug, and she mumbled apologies through her tears as he told her she had nothing to be sorry for. I wiped my own tears away. Chaz slipped his arm around my waist. See? Told you it'd work out, he whispered. Yeah. You were right for once, I added, nudging him. I considered trying to slip out and give my parents some time to catch up, but they were both suddenly looking at me, and I felt like I was a little kid in trouble again. What? You are not going anywhere until you tell me everything that happened, both of you, she said. Dad's smile fell away. Come on. I have a fresh batch of cookies. And Chaz, do you mind making coffee? Of course, he replied, then kissed the top of my head. He hurried into the kitchen. I let out a heavy sigh, knowing I was about to get the longest lecture of my life from my mother. Through all the story recounting, tears, yelling, cursing, and eventually hugging, I finally managed to slip from the kitchen while Mom and Dad were whispering quietly to each other. Chaz had gone to use the bathroom and send a message to Brogan and Bruni, letting them know all was going better than I expected. Mom had yelled at me for scaring her, but she'd yelled at Dad worse, and I'd smirked throughout the entire 3 minutes of her non-stop swearing at him to never keep the truth from her again. Ever, or he'd wind up with a frying pan upside the head. I stepped outside into the cool evening air, breathing it in. After being dragged around to so many different outposts, it was nice to be home, even if it was only for a week. I walked around the yard toward the trees that Mom never had the heart to take down, even though they'd been dead for years now. Closing my eyes, I reached out and rested my hand on the dry bark. Power slipped from my fingers in the shape of a violet light, surrounding the trunk and stretching out through every branch and down to every root. I poured life back into the tree, giving it a piece of myself, until leaves sprouted to life, filling it in completely. The rush of power took more out of me than I expected. I figured I was still recovering from the epic showdown and taking Brogan into the void. I started to sway, expecting to hit the ground, but instead met a warm chest keeping me upright. Chaz scowled down at me. What? You heard what Agnes told you. No powers yet. You already got in trouble for that stunt you pulled with Brogan. I got an earful for letting you do it. Only time, promise, I assured him, leaning back so I could see my handiwork. Worth it. He slipped his arms around me, as I stayed pressed against his chest, watching the breeze rustle the branches full of life now. Your dad can handle the rest. I know. Talk to Brogan? Just texted him. Told him we were all alive. He told me they're a few hours out still. Has he done it yet? I asked with a smirk. Didn't ask, but from the hesitation in his last text, I'd say no, he replied with a laugh. And we're not going to bug him either. Let them have their time so we can have ours. And what would you like to do with ours? I asked as I turned around, waggling my eyebrows. He burst out laughing. What? You don't find this look highly attractive? He leaned down and kissed me. I thought we might have a nice dinner in town. Like a normal couple. And then see where the night takes us. I gave a nod. So, dinner it is then. Not sure I can eat much after all those cookies, but I'll give it a go. He hugged me again, just holding me. I closed my eyes, sinking into his embrace. This was all I wanted for a week. No fighting, no powers, just Chaz and me together. I glanced over his shoulder to the back door. Mom and Dad were there, I could see their silhouettes. They were watching us. Dad had his arm draped over her shoulders as she leaned into him. He kissed the top of her head, and then they turned away, disappearing into the house. Ready to go? Chaz asked. Yeah, I'm ready. We left through the gate, climbed into the car, and drove the short distance into the main part of town. We strolled around for a while, holding hands, window shopping, and talking about anything other than fighting or cleansers or the hell we'd been through. We'd already had those talks, and I'm sure at some point they would come up again. But now we were both condemned to let the past stay in the past. What the future held, I had no freaking idea, but with Chaz and Brogan and Bruni, I was no longer so afraid of the unknown. We were the most powerful team to exist in decades. I almost felt sorry for whatever bad guys tried to come for us next. They'd get a rude awakening and a bruised backside.
Chapter 13. Brogan. My cell dinged, and I checked the message from Chaz. That Rori? Bruni asked, her eyes focused on the long stretch of road ahead of us and the mountains in the distance. No. Chaz. Says so far all is going well. Good. Should be able to meet up with us in a week as planned, at the outpost in Maine. Yeah. Not looking forward to dealing with whatever this crap is we're going to be driving into, without the four of us together, she mumbled. What kind of creature steals hearts from their victims? I shrugged. Not sure. Could be werewolves. Could be goblins. Who freaking knows? We'll figure it out once we get there. Next week. You sure you don't want to go there now? Very sure. We need a break. We were currently driving to check in with my family and stay at the cabin on the land, the one where I was most connected to the world around me. Bruni's folks lived near the outpost, so she'd already visited with them and let them know she was alive and well and part of the team. With everything moving so fast, she hadn't had time to tell them. Now we would be seeing my parents, and I would be delivering the sad news that Grayson was dead, but at least I knew he was happy. Rori had even taken the time to take me into the void before she left, so I could speak with him. We'd sat and talked for an hour, mostly about his time with Chaz's parents and Trevor. He told me the importance of being with a team, being open and willing to face all trials head-on. I understood most of what he said now, after going through so much turmoil in the beginning with Rori and Chaz. And now with Bruni. I glanced at Bruni. She nibbled on her bottom lip, as she did when she was thinking. What? Huh? What do you mean what? She asked in a rush. What, nothing, I'm good. You're thinking about something. Care to share? We've still got a few hours to go, and this is going to be a long drive if we don't talk about anything. She tapped her fingers on the steering wheel. Really, it's nothing. Bruni, I'm not an idiot, not blind, and I definitely remember whether you seem to think I do or not. I reached over carefully and covered her hand with mine. Pull over for a second. Her gaze glowed softly as it flickered from my hand to my face, then back to the road. She signaled to pull off to the side. With the car safely parked, she turned to face me, opened her mouth to probably give me some over-analyzed rundown of why she kissed me when she thought I was dead, but I stopped her. I undid my seatbelt, shifted as close as I could, and cupped her face. Gently, my lips brushed over hers, tentatively at first until she sighed, leaning into my touch. We pulled back from each other, my own eyes reflected in her gaze, lightning shooting through them like storm clouds rolling in on the horizon. I remember. I didn't want to say anything, she replied. You were dying in my arms, and I wasn't even thinking, but if you were going to die, I had to. She traced her fingers across my face, then grabbed my chin firmly in her fingers as she pulled me back for another kiss. Never scare me like that again. No dying. Well, if the priest had known what she was doing, ow! I exclaimed, then laughed as she socked me in the arm. Kidding. I was kidding. You better be, she huffed through her grin as she settled back in the driver's seat. I'm a damned good priest, and you know it. Known what I was doing, she mumbled, starting the car again. If my shaman hadn't taken that last hit for me, it might have turned out differently. I leaned across and kissed her again, stopping her ranting. She buried her hands in my hair, and I wished the cabin was only minutes away instead of hours. I was not going to let you take that hit. What? She mumbled. I drew back. Her eyes dreamy, she shook her head, shoving me back into my seat. We'll continue this conversation later. Is that so? Yes, that's so. Put your damn seatbelt on, so we can get going again. She was grinning the whole time she said it, trying and failing to stay annoyed with me. She pulled back onto the road, and when she rested her arm on the center console, I held her hand in mine for the rest of the drive toward our new lives and wherever they might lead.
Thank you for listening. This has been a Ciara Graves book. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified of new releases.